Billionaire gave two black credit cards to test two women. What the maid bought left him speechless. Denise looked at the card, then at Richard, then back at the card. Why me? Because you're the only person in my life who seems real, he thought. Because your hands don't shake when you're serving, but they're shaking now, holding something that could change your world. Because I need to know if genuine goodness exists, or if everyone has a price. Have you ever wondered if the people closest to you love you, or your wallet? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. He placed two identical black cards on the marble counter. Unlimited spending power in plastic form. Never knowing one would expose his heart while the other would break it. Have you ever wondered if the people closest to you love you or your wallet? What would you do to find out the truth? Richard Cole stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Dallas penthouse, watching city lights twinkle like fallen stars. At 42, he owned half the skyline below, but tonight something felt hollow about his empire. The party behind him buzzed with laughter and champagne toasts, but his mind kept drifting to darker thoughts. More champagne, Mr. Cole. The voice was soft, professional, familiar. He turned to find Denise refilling glasses with practiced grace. She moved through his world of excess like she belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, uniform crisp despite hours of service. What caught his attention wasn't her beauty, though she was stunning in that understated way wealthy men's wives paid surgeons to achieve. It was her hands. They never trembled, never rushed, never grasped for more than what was offered. Thank you, Denise. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the glass. Electric, unexpected, dangerous. She nodded and continued her rounds, checking on guests who barely acknowledged her existence. Richard watched her navigate conversations about stock portfolios and yacht purchases, invisible to people discussing amounts that could change her life forever. His girlfriend Victoria appeared beside him, designer dress, clinging to curves that cost more than most people's cars. Darling, the Hendersons are asking about Aspen again. Should I tell them we'll use the jet next weekend? Richard's attention remained fixed on Denise, who was now quietly cleaning up a spilled drink while the guilty party continued talking about his latest art acquisition. She handled the mess without complaint, without expectation of thanks, without the entitled fury that would have erupted from Victoria in the same situation. Richard, Victoria's voice carried that familiar edge when she felt ignored. Sure, whatever you want. The words came automatically, but his focus stayed locked on the woman who'd just disappeared into the kitchen. An idea began forming. Twisted, perhaps. Definitely revealing. He'd spent years wondering about loyalty, about love versus opportunity. Tonight, watching the contrast between Victoria's expectations and Denise's quiet service, a test crystallized in his mind. Two women, two cards, 48 hours of unlimited spending. Victoria would undoubtedly indulge every material fantasy she'd ever harbored. Designer bags, exotic vacations, jewelry that cost more than houses. Her predictability was almost boring. But Denise? She was an unknown quantity. A single mother from Atlanta who sent half her paycheck to family down south. A woman who declined his Christmas bonuses because she felt uncomfortable accepting more than her work earned. What would unlimited power reveal about her character? The party wound down around midnight, guests departing in expensive cars toward expensive homes. Victoria kissed his cheek with lips that tasted like expensive wine and cheaper promises. I'm staying at my place tonight, she murmured against his ear. That merger has you distracted, and I need attention you can't give right now. Perfect. He needed privacy for what came next. Denise was finishing up in the kitchen, loading the industrial dishwasher with the efficiency of someone who'd worked service jobs her entire life. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across features that never revealed too much. Mr. Cole, I thought you'd gone to bed. I wanted to thank you. Tonight was seamless, as always. A slight smile touched her lips. Just doing my job. Denise, I have a proposition. Something unusual. Her posture shifted slightly, protective instincts engaging. In her world, unusual propositions from wealthy men rarely ended well for women like her. I'm conducting a business experiment. It involves spending patterns and consumer behavior. The lie came easily, but her intelligence was evident in the way her eyes narrowed slightly. I'd like to give you a credit card for 48 hours. Unlimited spending. Use it however you see fit. I don't understand. Richard pulled out one of the black cards he'd prepared earlier. American Express Centurion. No limit. No restrictions. Power that could reshape lives or destroy them. 48 hours. Buy whatever you want, need, or dream about. Consider it a bonus for 3 years of exceptional service. Denise stared at the card like it might bite her. This feels wrong. Nothing wrong about it. Think of it as research. I'm curious what different people prioritize when money isn't a factor. What's the catch? Smart woman. No catch. Spend it, enjoy it, keep whatever you buy. The only requirement is that you use it. She reached out slowly, fingers trembling slightly as they closed around the plastic. 48 hours? Starting now. Denise looked at the card, then at Richard, then back at the card. Why me? Because you're the only person in my life who seems real, he thought. Because your hands don't shake when you're serving, but they're shaking now, holding something that could change your world. Because I need to know if genuine goodness exists, or if everyone has a price. Call it curiosity, he said instead. She slipped the card into her purse with the careful reverence of someone handling dynamite. Thank you, Mr. Cole. I won't. I'll be responsible. Denise. She paused at the kitchen doorway. Don't be responsible. For once in your life, be free. After she left, Richard poured himself another bourbon and stared at the city below. Tomorrow, Victoria would get her matching card and her own 48 hours of unlimited freedom. Then he'd learn which woman deserved his trust, his love, and his future. The idea struck him during his third glass of bourbon. A test so simple, so revealing, it would strip away every mask. 2 cards, 2 women, 48 hours. What'd go wrong? Drop your thoughts below about what you think each woman will choose. And hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will shock you. She stared at the black card like it might explode. Unlimited power in the hands of a woman who counted every dollar twice. If someone handed you unlimited spending power for 48 hours, would you take it? What would that say about your character? Victoria stretched across Egyptian cotton sheets in her downtown loft, manicured fingers dancing across her phone screen. The text from Richard had arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, just as she trained him to schedule their communications. Meet me for brunch. Have something special for you. She smiled, already mentally cataloging which outfit would best complement whatever jewelry or surprise he had planned. Richard's gifts were always impressive. Last month's diamond tennis bracelet still caught light beautifully against her wrist. The restaurant overlooked Deep Ellum, all exposed brick and artisanal everything. Richard sat at their usual table, but something was different. His posture was too straight, his smile too calculated. She recognized that look from his business meetings. You seem energetic this morning, Victoria said, settling into her chair with the fluid grace that came from years of cotillion and charm school. I have a proposal. A game, actually. Richard slid an identical black card across the white tablecloth. 48 hours of unlimited spending. Buy anything you want. Victoria's pulse quickened as she picked up the card, feeling its weight. American Express Centurion. She'd hinted about wanting one for months, but Richard had always deflected. Too much power, he'd said. Too tempting. What's the occasion? Call an early birthday present. Or a test of our compatibility. The word test sent warning signals through her perfectly styled brain, but the card in her hand was singing louder. What kind of test? The kind that reveals character. What do you do when money isn't a limitation? Victoria's mind was already racing through possibilities. The Hermes bag she'd been coveting. That penthouse in South Beach she'd bookmarked online. The jewelry collection that would make her friends weep with envy. 48 hours, starting when? Now. She leaned across the table and kissed him with calculated passion. You wonderful, generous man. This is exactly what I needed. What will you do first? Miami, she said without hesitation. I've been dying to get back to South Beach. Maybe by that oceanfront condo I showed you last month. Richard's expression remained neutral, but Victoria caught something flickering behind his eyes. Disappointment? Relief? She couldn't tell. Sound perfect. Enjoy yourself. Aren't you coming with me? This is your adventure. I'll be here when you get back. Victoria was already pulling out her phone, booking flights, and making calls to personal shoppers across 3 states. Freedom tasted like champagne and possibility. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in East Dallas, Denise sat at her kitchen table staring at her own black card. Her nephew Marcus played video games in the living room, his inhaler within easy reach. The medical bills scattered across her table told a story of sleepless nights and impossible choices. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Keisha in Atlanta. Doctor says mama needs that surgery soon. Insurance won't cover experimental treatment. $47,000. Denise's hands shook as she picked up the black card. $47,000. A number that had haunted her dreams for 3 months. Her mother's only chance at beating the cancer that was slowly stealing her breath. She thought about Mr. Cole's words, "Don't be responsible. For once in your life, be free." But freedom meant different things to different people. Victoria's freedom looked like yacht parties and designer shopping sprees. Denise's freedom looked like sleeping without worrying about losing the people she loved most. Her finger traced the raised numbers on the card. Unlimited spending, he'd said. No restrictions. Denise had never stolen anything in her life, never taken charity she hadn't earned, never asked for handouts, even when eviction notices piled up like fallen leaves. But this wasn't stealing. This was a gift, a chance to save her mother's life. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. "Where you going, Auntie D?" Marcus called from the couch. "To change our lives, baby. To change everything." The drive to Atlanta would take 4 hours, but Denise made it in 3. The black card burned in her wallet like a secret she couldn't share, but with every mile south, her resolve strengthened. Victoria was already on a plane to Miami before Denise made her first purchase. Neither woman knew the other existed in Richard's test, but both their choices would collide in ways that would shatter everything. Tell me in the comments which woman you think is making the right choice. And don't forget to like this video if you're invested in seeing how this plays out. While one woman bought a yacht, the other bought hope, and Richard had no idea which purchase would cost him more. What reveals more about someone's character? How they spend money or how they earn it? Which woman would you choose? The Miami sunshine felt like liquid gold against Victoria's skin as she stepped out of the Uber onto Collins Avenue. South Beach stretched before her like a playground designed specifically for the wealthy and beautiful. She'd already booked the penthouse suite at the St. Regis, but that was just the beginning. Her first stop was the Hermes boutique in the Design District. The saleswoman's eyes widened when Victoria presented the black card, then widened further when the transaction went through without a hitch. $50,000 for a crocodile Birkin bag that would make her friends die of envy. "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" Victoria smiled, feeling power course through her veins like expensive wine. This is just the beginning. By noon, she'd acquired a collection that read like a materialistic fairy tale. Designer shoes that cost more than cars, jewelry that sparkled like captured starlight, and enough luxury goods to stock a small boutique. Each purchase felt like validation, proof that she deserved this lifestyle, that her beauty and charm had earned her this moment of unlimited indulgence. The yacht broker's office overlooked the marina, where boats worth more than small countries bobbed in crystal clear water. Victoria felt intoxicated by possibility as she toured a 120-foot azimut that had been on the market for months. "She's beautiful," Victoria breathed, running her fingers along polished rails that gleamed like mirrors. $7.2 million, the broker said carefully, fully loaded with all amenities. Victoria pulled out the black card without hesitation. The transaction took longer than usual, multiple calls to confirm the astronomical amount, but when it cleared, she owned her first yacht. 300 miles north, Denise sat in a different kind of waiting room. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta bustled with the controlled chaos of a hospital that never slept. The financial aid office smelled like coffee and desperation, but Denise felt calmer than she had in months. "Mrs. Washington?" The counselor looked exhausted but kind. I have your mother's file here. The experimental treatment we discussed. I'd like to pay for it. Denise placed the black card on the desk with steady hands. All of it. Today. The woman's eyebrows rose. Ma'am, the total cost, including hospitalization and follow-up care, is $78,000. Are you certain? I'm certain. While paper were processed, Denise walked through the pediatric ward. Children with bald heads and bright smiles played video games and laughed with volunteers. Some had family hovering anxiously nearby. Others sat alone, their parents probably working multiple jobs just to survive. At the nurse's station, Denise made a quiet inquiry. How many families here can't afford their treatment? The head nurse looked surprised by the question. Too many. We have a charity fund, but it's always stretched thin. Why do you ask? Denise thought about Victoria, probably buying her third designer handbag by now. She thought about Richard's words about freedom and responsibility. She thought about her own mother, lying in a hospital bed 400 miles away, waiting for news about whether she'd live to see another Christmas. I'd like to make a donation to that fund. That's very generous. How much were you thinking? Denise looked at the children through the glass partition, their faces bright with hope despite circumstances that would crush most adults. Everything left after my mother's treatment. However much that is. The transaction took 2 hours to process completely. When it was finished, Denise had paid for her mother's experimental cancer treatment, covered the outstanding medical bills for 12 families in the pediatric ward, and established a scholarship fund for nursing students from low-income backgrounds. She drove home as the sun set over Georgia highways, the black card now just a piece of plastic in her wallet. But her phone buzzed constantly with messages from the hospital staff, from families whose crushing debt had disappeared like morning fog, from students who could now afford to finish their healthcare education. Richard received the transaction alerts in real time. Victoria's purchases painted a picture of predictable excess. Luxury goods, real estate, indulgent experiences that served no one but herself. Each notification confirmed what he'd suspected about her character. But Denise's spending pattern left him speechless. Medical bills, charity donations, educational scholarships. The final transaction came through at 11:47 p.m., a down payment on a small house in her old neighborhood, purchased not for herself, but for her nephew's family, to have something stable. When the final transaction came through at 11:47 p.m., a down payment on a small house in Denise's old neighborhood for her nephew's family. Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years of wealth. Genuine surprise at his own desire. Share your pick below, Victoria or Denise. Which woman's choices revealed true character? Hit that like button and tell me what you would have bought with unlimited spending power. He thought he was testing them, but the cards revealed a truth about himself he wasn't prepared to face. He was falling for his maid. Have you ever discovered you were attracted to someone's soul before their body? When did you realize kindness was the ultimate aphrodisiac? Richard's Dallas office felt smaller somehow as he spread both transaction reports across his mahogany desk. Outside, the city hummed with its usual Tuesday morning energy, but inside his climate-controlled sanctuary, everything had shifted. Victoria's receipts read like a catalog of wealth worship. Yacht purchase, luxury condo down payment, designer everything. $7.8 million spent in 36 hours, each transaction screaming, "Look at me, look what I can afford, look how fabulous my life is." Then there was Denise's report. Medical bills, hospital donations, educational scholarships, a house down payment for family members. Her spending told a different story entirely. Look at who I can help. Look at what really matters. Look at what love actually looks like in action. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Cole? Victoria's here to see you. Send her in." Victoria entered like she was walking a runway, designer bags from her Miami shopping spree, creating a parade of excess behind her. Her smile was radiant, satisfied, victorious. "Darling, I had the most incredible time. You should have seen the yacht. It's absolutely perfect for entertaining. And the penthouse has this view of the ocean that's just—" She paused, noticing his expression. "What's wrong? Tell me about your experience." Victoria settled into the leather chair across from his desk, crossing legs that had been professionally bronzed during her South Beach adventure. It was freedom, Richard. Pure, unlimited freedom. I bought everything I've ever wanted and more. The yacht alone is worth almost $8 million, but it's an investment. We can use it for business entertaining, take clients out. Well, yes. I assumed. I mean, these purchases benefit both of us, don't they? The condo in Miami gives us a winter retreat. The yacht expands our social opportunities. She trailed off as Richard's silence stretched uncomfortably long. Did you think about anyone else during those 48 hours? Victoria's laugh tinkled like expensive crystal. Of course I thought about you. Every purchase was with us in mind. The jewelry will look stunning at your business functions. The wardrobe will represent your success beautifully. I meant anyone who wasn't us. I don't understand the question. That was the problem. She genuinely didn't understand. In 48 hours of unlimited resources, Victoria hadn't spent a single dollar on anyone but herself. The world's suffering, the city's poverty, the opportunities to change lives, none of it had occurred to her. The yacht is beautiful, Richard said finally. Enjoy it. Aren't you excited? This is everything we've talked about. What do we talk about yachts? Not specifically yachts, but this lifestyle. This level of success. This is what winning looks like, Richard. After Victoria left, trailing perfume and satisfaction, Richard sat alone with Denise's transaction report. Each line item told a story of sacrifice transformed into service. Her mother's cancer treatment, $78,000. Pediatric war donations, $150,000. Nursing scholarships, $75,000. The house for her nephew's family, $45,000 down payment. She'd had access to unlimited wealth and used it to heal instead of hoard. His phone rang. Denise's soft voice on the other end made his chest tighten unexpectedly. Mr. Cole, I wanted to return the card and thank you properly. How was your experience? A pause. Life-changing. My mother starts treatment next week, and, well, a lot of families won't have to choose between medical bills and groceries anymore. You didn't buy anything for yourself. I did, actually. I bought peace of mind. I bought my mother's chance at more time. I bought other kids the chance to grow up with their parents. Those feel like pretty selfish purchases when you think about it. Richard closed his eyes, feeling something crack open in his chest. Denise, would you have dinner with me tonight? Not as employee and employer. As something else. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Cole, I'm not sure that's appropriate. My name is Richard, and nothing about what I'm feeling right now is appropriate. What are you feeling? That I've been looking for love in all the wrong places. That character matters more than compatibility. That I've wasted years on someone who sees unlimited resources as a shopping opportunity instead of a chance to change the world. You're talking about Victoria. I'm talking about you, Denise. I'm talking about the fact that your choices over the past 48 hours taught me more about real wealth than 20 years of business success. Richard, his name sounded different in her voice. Warmer, more personal. Dinner, just dinner. Let me cook for you for once instead of the other way around. I don't know if this is wise. Wisdom is overrated. Say yes. That evening, Richard stood in his kitchen attempting something he hadn't done in years. Cooking an actual meal instead of ordering from Dallas's finest restaurants. The salmon was slightly overcooked and the vegetables were imperfect, but something about the domestic normalcy felt more luxurious than any five-star dining experience. Denise arrived at 8, wearing a simple blue dress that made his breath catch. No designer labels, no flashy jewelry, no obvious attempts to impress. Just natural beauty and quiet elegance that made Victoria's calculated glamour seem artificial in comparison. You cooked, she observed, surprise and amusement mixing in her voice. I try to cook. There's a difference. They sat at his kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, sharing wine that cost more than most people's rent while talking about things that money couldn't buy. Denise told him about growing up in Atlanta, about raising her nephew after her sister struggles with addiction, about working 3 jobs to send money home while pursuing her nursing degree at night. You're in school. Part-time. Online mostly. I want to be a pediatric nurse. Why didn't you tell me? Because domestic work pays better than school allows time for. I needed the money more than I needed the degree. She paused. At least I did before yesterday. And now my family's taken care of, and I can focus on what I actually want to do with my life instead of just surviving. Richard realized he was staring, memorizing the way candlelight played across her features, the way she gestures when she talked about her dreams, the way her eyes lit up when she mentioned the families whose medical bills she'd eliminated. Victoria thinks the yacht is an investment, he said suddenly. Is it? It's $7 million worth of floating ego. It doesn't help anyone, doesn't solve any problems, doesn't make the world better in any measurable way. But it makes her happy. Does it? Or does it just feed a need that can never be satisfied? There's always a bigger yacht, a more expensive bag, a more exclusive experience. Denise set down her wine glass, studying his face. What are you really asking me, Richard? I'm asking if you think a person can change. If someone who spent years chasing the wrong things can learn to want better ones. People change when they want to change. The question is, what do you want? He reached across the island, fingers brushing hers. The electric connection he'd felt the night before was stronger now, complicated by respect and genuine attraction. I want something real, something that matters. Someone who sees unlimited resources as responsibility instead of opportunity for excess. That's a pretty specific want. I'm looking at a pretty specific woman. Victoria's laughter from the bedroom felt like nails on glass as Richard stared at the transaction report. Tomorrow, he would have to choose between the life he'd built and the woman who just redefined what love could look like. Comment below. Have you ever realized you were attracted to someone's character before their beauty? Share your awakening moment. And hit subscribe because what happens next will change everything. The moment their eyes met across his kitchen island, both knew the game had changed. Employee and employer had become woman and man who couldn't deny what was building between them. When was the last time someone's goodness made you question everything about yourself? What would you risk for a chance at real love? Dawn light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting them both in gold as coffee grew cold between them and truth hung in the air like morning mist. They'd talked until 3 a.m., moving from kitchen to living room to the balcony overlooking Dallas, conversations flowing like wine from expensive bottles Richard had been saving for special occasions. This felt like the most special occasion of his life. I should go, Denise said, but she didn't move from where she sat curled in the corner of his leather sofa, her legs tucked under her blue dress, hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Should you? People will talk if they see my car here this late. Or this early. Let them talk. She studied his face in the golden morning light. Easy for you to say. You're not the domestic worker, sleeping with her employer. Is that what we're doing? Sleeping together? Aren't we? Richard moved closer on the sofa, close enough to see gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to count the freckles across her nose that makeup never quite covered. I don't know what we're doing. I only know I don't want it to stop. Richard, say my name like that again. This is complicated. The best things usually are. Denise reached for her coffee cup at the same moment Richard reached for his. Their hands collided, fingers tangling around warm ceramic, and suddenly the air changed. Electric. Charged. Dangerous. Neither pulled away. Denise. Her name felt different on his tongue now. Not the polite acknowledgement of help he'd been giving for 3 years, but something intimate. Personal. Possessive. This is crazy, she whispered, but her fingers tightened around his instead of retreating. Completely crazy. You have a girlfriend. I have someone who spends my money and looks good at business functions. There's a difference. Is there? Instead of answering with words, Richard cupped her face with his free hand, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Her skin was impossibly soft, warm, real in a way that made Victoria's artificial perfection seem like a poor imitation of actual beauty. You spent unlimited money on other people, he murmured, leaning closer. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How beautiful that makes you? I'm not beautiful. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Not just your face, though that stopped my heart. Your soul, Denise. Your heart. The way you see the world and want to fix it instead of just taking from it. Their lips were inches apart now, coffee forgotten, morning light forgotten, everything forgotten except the pull between them that had been building for 3 years without either acknowledging it. If we do this, Denise whispered, everything changes. Everything already changed. The moment you handed back that card and told me you'd bought peace of mind for other families. The moment I realized I've been settling for someone who sees people as accessories instead of human beings. Victoria. Victoria, doesn't matter right now. Nothing matters except this. He leaned closer, breath warm against her lips. Except you. The kiss was inevitable. Had been from the moment she'd walked into his party and he'd noticed her hands didn't shake. Soft at first, tentative, testing. Then deeper as she responded, her free hand fisting his shirt, pulling him closer instead of pushing away. She tasted like coffee and possibility, like everything he'd been searching for without knowing he was lost. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, her eyes were wide with surprise and something that looked like wonder. I wanted to do that for so long, she admitted. How long? Since the Christmas party 2 years ago. You walked me to my car because it was late, and you waited until I started the engine before you went back inside. Such a small thing, but no one had ever. She trailed off, shaking her head. No one had ever what? Made sure I was safe. Protected me without wanting something in return. Richard felt something crack in his chest. Denise, I know this is a bad idea. Probably. I know I'm not what men like you usually want. Men like me usually want the wrong things. She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. What happens when you get tired of playing house with the help? What happens when you realize I'm not playing? Before she could respond, the sound of a key in the front door froze them both. Victoria's voice carried from the entryway, bright and confident and completely unexpected. Richard, I brought breakfast from that place you love. I thought we could plan the yacht's inaugural party. Her voice grew closer as designer heels clicked across marble floors. Richard and Denise sprang apart, but not quickly enough. Victoria appeared in the living room doorway, arms full of expensive pastry boxes, and stopped dead. Her gaze moved from Richard's rumpled shirt to Denise's mussed hair to the intimate distance they'd barely managed to create between them on the sofa. Coffee cups and wine glasses from the night before told their own story. The pastry boxes hit the floor. Well, Victoria said, voice sharp as broken crystal. This is cozy. Victoria's key turned in the front door, just as Richard's hand cupped Denise's cheek, their lips inches apart, the sound of designer heels clicking toward the kitchen like a countdown to explosion. Comment below. Have you ever been caught in a moment that changed everything? What would you do in this situation? And hit that like button if you're invested in this love triangle, because what happens next will leave you speechless. 3 hearts, 2 women, 1 man, and a confrontation that would leave nothing standing when the smoke cleared. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly known your life was about to explode? What do you do when the person you thought you knew reveals their true nature? Victoria's manicured fingers released expensive pastries that scattered across marble like confetti at a funeral. The silence stretched between them, thick as Dallas humidity, while Richard's hand slowly dropped from Denise's face. Well, Victoria repeated, her voice climbing octaves that crystal glasses envied. This is cozy indeed. Denise stood first, smoothing her blue dress with hands that trembled slightly. Mrs. Patterson, I can't explain. Mrs. Patterson? Victoria's laugh could have cut glass. Oh, honey, we're way past formalities now. You can call me the woman whose boyfriend you're stealing. Victoria. Richard's voice carried warning, but she was already moving, pacing the living room like a caged predator in designer heels. No, Richard, don't Victoria me. Not when I walk into your home, our home, and find you playing house with the help. She spun toward Denise, eyes blazing. How long has this been going on? It's not what you think, Denise said quietly. Really? Because I think I caught my boyfriend of 2 years about to kiss his maid in his living room at dawn. Please, enlighten me about what I'm missing. Richard moved between them. Victoria, calm down. Calm down. Her voice reached frequencies that made windows tremble. "I just spent $7 million of your money on a yacht for us, and you're telling me to calm down while she sits there looking all innocent in yesterday's dress?" Denise's face flushed, but her voice stayed steady. "I should go." "Yes, you should." Victoria's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Back to whatever section of town girls like you come from." "That's enough." Richard's voice dropped dangerous degrees. "Don't talk to her like that. I'll talk to her however I want. She's your employee, Richard. Your maid. She cleans toilets for a living, and you're defending her honor like she's some kind of princess." The color drained from Denise's face, but she straightened her shoulders. "You're right. I do clean toilets. I also work 60 hours a week to support my family, put myself through school at night, and somehow manage to treat people with basic human decency. Something money apparently can't buy." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Don't lecture me about decency, sweetheart. You're the one sleeping with another woman's man." "I haven't slept with anyone yet, but that was the plan, wasn't it?" Poor little Cinderella, hoping Prince Charming would lift her out of poverty with his magic wallet. "Victoria, stop." Richard's voice carried real anger now. "Why? Because I'm telling the truth? Because I'm pointing out that she's a gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it?" Denise stepped forward, and for the first time since Victoria's arrival, her composure cracked. "A gold digger? I gave back $40 million, you ridiculous woman. I could have bought a mansion, a fleet of cars, enough jewelry to open my own store. Instead, I paid medical bills for families I don't even know. If I'm a gold digger, I'm the worst one in history. 40 million? Victoria's voice went quiet, dangerous. "What 40 million? Richard closed his eyes. "The test." She didn't know about the test. "Oh, this is rich." Victoria's laugh was bitter as month-old wine. "You gave her $40 million? When? Why?" "It was a business experiment," Richard said weakly. "Business experiment?" Victoria turned on him with fury that could have powered the city grid. "You gave some random, made $40 million as a business experiment, but you question every thousand I spend on necessities. It wasn't random. How long have you been planning this? How long have you been making a fool of me while you played sugar daddy to the staff?" Denise had heard enough. "I'm leaving." "No." Victoria blocked her path to the door. "You're not running away that easy. I want to know exactly what happened here. Move, please. Make me." The air crackled with tension thick enough to swim through. Two women facing off while the man who'd caused the collision stood frozen between worlds he'd never meant to combine. Richard stepped forward. "Victoria, let her leave. So you can chase after her? So you can comfort the poor little maid after the mean rich lady hurt her feelings? So this doesn't get uglier than it already is." But ugly was relative, and Victoria was just getting started. Her smile turned predatory as she pulled out her phone. "You know what? This is actually perfect. My friends are going to love this story." Poor Richard, so desperate for something real that he fell for the oldest trick in the book, the sweet, innocent act from someone who probably planned this whole thing. "Put the phone down." "Why? Embarrassed? Afraid your business partners might hear about your new hobby?" Denise finally spoke, voice quiet but carrying absolute finality. "I quit." Both Richard and Victoria turned to her. "I quit, effective immediately. I'll send someone for my things later." She looked at Richard with eyes that held disappointment deeper than any anger Victoria could muster. This was a mistake. All of it. She walked toward the door, but Victoria's voice followed her like a curse. "Run away, Cinderella. But remember, midnight always comes. And when it does, you'll be back to scrubbing floors while I'm still here." The front door closed with a sound like final judgment. Richard stared at the space where Denise had been, feeling something vital drain out of him. Victoria stood in his living room, surrounded by scattered pastries and shattered illusions, and for the first time in 2 years, he saw her clearly. "Are you happy now?" Victoria's defiance flickered. "She's gone, isn't she? We can get back to normal." "Normal?" Richard's laugh held no humor. "You just showed me exactly who you are when someone threatens your access to my money. You think I can unsee that?" "Richard, I was upset. You were vicious. You were cruel to someone whose only crime was being better than you in ways that matter." "Better than me?" Victoria's voice rose again. I'm educated, sophisticated, connected. You spent $7 million on toys, while she spent the same amount saving lives. You're beautiful, Victoria, but she's good. And I just realized I've been settling for beautiful when I should have been looking for good. So that's it? You're throwing away 2 years for some fantasy about your maid. I'm throwing away 2 years because they were built on the wrong foundation. Because I confused compatibility with character. Because I chose someone who sees people as accessories instead of human beings. Victoria stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You're serious. Dead serious. She'll never fit into your world, Richard. She doesn't know how to move in our circles, how to handle the pressure, how to be what you need. Maybe I don't need what I thought I needed. Maybe I need someone who makes me want to be better instead of someone who just makes me look good. Victoria grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with fury and disbelief. When this falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. Don't expect me to pick up the pieces when reality hits. I won't. She paused at the door, turning back with something that might have been genuine hurt beneath the anger. I loved you, in my way. I know, but your way and my way were never the same. I just didn't realize it until now. After she left, Richard stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the wreckage of a life that had looked perfect from the outside, but felt empty at its core. The pastries were still scattered across his floor, and somewhere across the city, the woman he was falling in love with thought she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. He had 48 hours to prove her wrong. Time to show her that some risks were worth taking, even when they turned your world upside down. Have you ever had to choose between comfort and truth? Between what looked right and what felt right? Drop your thoughts in the comments about which choice takes more courage. And hit subscribe, because Richard's about to learn that winning back trust is harder than earning it in the first place. The past has teeth, and Richards was about to bite down hard on the future he desperately wanted with a woman who was already walking away. When someone's history threatens your future, how do you decide what's worth fighting for? Have you ever discovered something about someone you love that made you question everything? Denise's apartment felt smaller than usual as rain pelted the windows, each drop hitting glass like accusations she couldn't escape. Her laptop glowed on the kitchen table, search results spreading across the screen like evidence in a trial where her heart was the defendant. Richard Cole relationships had yielded more results than she'd expected. Photos from charity galas, society page mentions, business journal features. But it was the pattern that made her stomach turn cold. Isabella Morales, 2019. Former house manager. Relationship lasted 3 months before she was transferred to his Houston property with a generous severance package. Carmen Rodriguez, 2020. Personal assistant. Left suddenly after 4 months. Signed a confidentiality agreement. Maria Santos, 2021. Event coordinator. Quit without notice. Moved to Austin with enough money to start her own business. All beautiful. All employed by him first. All relationships that ended with money changing hands and women disappearing from his orbit. Her phone buzzed. Richard again. The 15th call in 2 hours. Denise, please. Let me explain. Victoria doesn't know what she's talking about. But the internet knew. The internet remembered everything. And it was painting a picture of a man who had a type and a pattern. Her nephew Marcus looked up from his homework at the kitchen table. You okay, Annie D? You look sick. Just tired, baby. But she wasn't tired. She was terrified. Terrified that she'd been just another name in a sequence. Another employee who'd caught the boss's attention until the novelty wore off. The knock on her door at midnight was soft but insistent. She knew who it would be before she checked the peephole. Richard stood in the hallway, soaked from rain, looking like he'd driven through hell to get there. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled, his eyes desperate in a way that would have broken her heart 12 hours ago. Now it just made her tired. Denise, please. 5 minutes. She opened the door, but didn't invite him in. What do you want, Richard? I want to explain about the women you found online. So he knew she'd been researching. Of course he did. Men like Richard always knew when people were digging into their secrets. Which woman should we start with? Isabella? Carmen? Maria? Or are there others I haven't found yet? Richard's face went pale. It's not what you think. Really? Because I think you have a pattern of getting involved with employees, and when it gets complicated, you make it go away with money. Tell me how wrong I am. You're wrong because none of those relationships were real. They were. He struggled for words. They were mistakes, loneliness, convenience. And what am I? You're everything. You're the reason I realized none of those other connections mattered. Denise laughed, but it sounded more like crying. Do you hear yourself? You're standing here telling me I'm different from all the other women you've said that to. Because you're different. How? Because I gave back the money? Because I played hard to get? Because I made you work for it? Because you made me want to be better? For how long, Richard? Until the next employee catches your eye? Until you get bored with playing house with someone from my neighborhood? Richard stepped closer, and she could see raindrops on his eyelashes, desperation in every line of his face. Denise, I love you. The words hung between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. You don't love me. You love the idea of me. You love how I make you feel about yourself. You love the story you tell yourself about being different from other rich men who use their power to get what they want. That's not true, isn't it? You tested me, Richard. You gave me that card to see what I'd do, like I was some kind of experiment. How is that different from what you did with the others? Because I was falling in love with you before the test. The card was just. I needed to know you were real. Real. Denise's voice rose for the first time. I've been real every day for 3 years. I've been real when I worked double shifts to cover other people's mistakes. I've been real when I sent half my paycheck home to take care of family. I've been real when I served your friends who looked through me like I was invisible. You want to know what's real? Real is being afraid to trust someone because their pattern suggests you are just another temporary distraction. Richard reached for her hand, but she stepped back. Denise, please, give me a chance to prove this is different. How? By writing another check? By setting up another test? By waiting until you get tired of me and then making me disappear with a nice severance package? I would never. You would, because it's what you do. It's your pattern, Richard, and patterns don't lie. She started to close the door, but his voice stopped her. What if I could prove it's different? What if I could show you that this isn't a pattern, it's evolution? Ow, give me 30 days. To do what? To show you who I am when I'm not trying to buy or test or manipulate. To show you who I become when I'm with someone who makes me want to earn their respect instead of just their attention. Denise stared at him through the crack in the door, rain still dripping from his hair, hope and desperation warring in his eyes. 30 days to do what exactly? To prove I'm not the man in those articles. To prove that what I feel for you isn't what I felt for them. To prove that I'm capable of love instead of just possession. And if you can't prove it, then I'll walk away. No calls, no gifts, no severance package. I'll disappear from your life and let you find someone who deserves you. Denise felt her resolve wavering. She'd spent 3 years watching him, and there had been moments, quiet moments when he thought no one was looking, when she'd seen something genuine beneath the polished surface. Something that suggested the man, standing in her hallway, might be capable of being more than his history suggested. 30 days, she said finally. But not as your employee, not in your house, not around your friends, not in your world. Then where? Here, in my world. If you want to prove you're different, prove you can exist outside your comfort zone. Prove you can care about someone without controlling their environment. Richard nodded quickly. Done. And no money. No gifts. No grand gestures. No attempts to solve problems with your bank account. Agreed. And if I catch you treating this like another experiment, if I see even a hint that you're studying me instead of knowing me, it's over. Understood. Denise studied his face in the harsh hallway light, looking for signs of the manipulation she'd seen in his business dealings, the calculation that seemed to drive every interaction. Instead, she saw something that looked suspiciously like vulnerability. One more thing. Anything. If we do this, it's because you want me. Not because you want to save me, not because you want to prove something to yourself, not because you're bored with your regular life. Just because you want me. Can you handle that? Richard's answer came without hesitation. I've wanted you since the first Christmas party when you declined my bonus because you said you hadn't earned it. I've wanted you since you worked through the flu because you didn't want to leave me short-staffed. I've wanted you since I realized you were the only person in my life who never asked for anything except the chance to do your job well. Despite everything, despite the fear and the patterns and the history, Denise felt her heart skip. 30 days, she said again. 30 days. She closed the door and leaned against it, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Through the thin walls, she could hear Marcus finishing his homework, the neighbor's television, the sounds of a neighborhood where people worked hard for everything they had. Tomorrow, Richard Cole would enter her world. The question was whether he'd survive it long enough to prove he deserved a place in it. Tell me in the comments, would you give someone 30 days to prove they've changed their pattern? What would it take to convince you that love was real and not just another game? Hit that subscribe button because day one of Richard's test starts tomorrow, and it's not going to go the way he expects. She gave him 30 days to prove change was possible, not with money or gifts, but with the hardest currency of all, consistent action. What's the difference between wanting someone and earning them? How do you prove love when your history suggests you don't know what it means? Day one arrived with October humidity that made Dallas feel like an oven someone forgot to turn off. Richard stood outside Denise's apartment building at 6 a.m., holding 2 coffee cups and wondering if he'd lost his mind. The neighborhood looked different in morning light. Kids walked to school, backpacks dragging. Mothers hurried to catch buses. Men in work uniforms headed to jobs that required muscle instead of meetings. This was Denise's world, a place where people earned everything they had, where respect came from showing up instead of showing off. Denise appeared at 6:15, uniform pressed, hair pulled back, ready for another day of work she no longer needed, but wouldn't abandon until she found something better. She stopped when she saw him. "You came. I said I would." She accepted the coffee with cautious gratitude. Day one. What's your plan? Richard had prepared for this question, but standing here in the real world, his planned speech felt ridiculous. "I thought I'd drive you to work. I take the bus. So I'll take the bus." Denise's eyebrows rose. "You've never been on public transportation in your life. Then today's a good day to start." The number 47 bus was a revelation. Richard had driven past these stops thousands of times without seeing the people who waited. Nurses finishing night shifts, construction workers heading to job sites, students going to community college classes. The bus was democracy in motion, a place where wealth meant nothing and everyone paid the same fare. Denise watched him take in the scenery through scratched windows, his expensive suit making him stand out like a diamond in a toolbox. "Second thoughts?" she asked as they swayed with the bus's rhythm. "About what?" "About whether this is worth 30 days of slumming it with regular people." Richard turned to look at her fully. "Denise, I've spent 20 years surrounded by people who agree with everything I say because I pay them to. I've eaten at restaurants where the meals cost more than most people make in a week. I've lived in a bubble so complete that I forgot what real life looked like. This isn't slumming it. This is remembering what actual living feels like." She studied his face for signs of performance, but his attention had shifted to an elderly woman struggling with shopping bags. Without hesitation, he stood and offered his seat. "Thank you, young man," the woman said, settling gratefully into the spot he'd vacated. It was a small gesture, but Denise noticed he didn't announce it, didn't look around for approval, didn't treat it like charity. He just helped because help was needed. Day 3 brought rain and revelation. Richard showed up at her apartment soaked because he'd been waiting outside for 45 minutes. "The bus doesn't run on your schedule," Denise observed. "I'm learning that, along with the fact that umbrellas cost $8 at the convenience store, and they're worth every penny." They rode in comfortable silence until Denise spoke. "Where do you eat lunch?" "Usually my office. Sometimes Lou Bernardine if I have meetings." "Today you're eating at Mama Rosa's with the rest of the staff." Mama Rosa's occupied a strip mall between a laundromat and a tax office. The lunch special was $6 for enough food to feed 2 people, and the clientele was hospital workers, city employees, and anyone who needed real food at honest prices. Richard ordered what Denise ordered and followed her to a booth with vinyl seats that had seen better decades. The conversation around them was genuine, people talking about their families, their struggles, their small victories. No one was performing for anyone else's benefit. "This is good," Richard said, tasting the tamales. "You sound surprised." "I am a little. I've been eating at places where the chef's reputation mattered more than the food. This actually tastes like someone's grandmother made it. Mama Rosa's grandmother did make it. Same recipes, same care, just without the pretension." By day 7, something had shifted. Richard no longer looked uncomfortable on the bus. He'd started conversations with regular passengers, learned their names, their stories. When Mrs. Johnson's grandson needed help with math homework, Richard spent his lunch break tutoring a kid who reminded him why intelligence wasn't about where you went to school. "You're different," Denise observed as they walked to her apartment after a particularly long day. "Different how?" "Quieter. Less performative. Like you're not trying to impress anyone. Maybe because I finally found someone worth being real for." Day 10 brought crisis. Marcus developed complications from his asthma, and the hospital bills started mounting despite Richard's previous intervention. Denise sat at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, trying to make numbers work that had no intention of cooperating. Richard found her there when he arrived for their daily coffee run. "What's wrong?" She showed him the bills without speaking. His first instinct was to reach for his checkbook, but something in her expression stopped him. "What do you need?" he asked instead. "I need to work more hours. I need to find a second job. I need to figure out how to be in 3 places at once. What can I do?" "Nothing. This isn't your problem to solve. But you're my problem to solve." The words came out wrong, and they both knew it. Denise's face went cold. "I'm not your problem, Richard. I'm not your project, or your charity case, or your experiment in dating down. I'm a person with a life that existed before you noticed me, and will continue after you get bored." Richard sat down across from her at the small table. "That came out wrong. Did it? Or did it come out exactly right? I meant that your problems matter to me. That when you're worried, I'm worried. That when you're struggling, I want to help not because I think you're weak, but because that's what people do for each other when they care. People like you solve problems with money. People like me used to solve problems with money. I'm trying to learn new ways." "Such as?" Richard looked around the small apartment, thinking, "I could watch Marcus while you work extra shifts. I could help with his homework so you don't have to stay up all night. I could learn to cook something besides reservations so you don't have to worry about dinner after 12-hour days." Denise stared at him. "You want to babysit my nephew and cook dinner. I want to be useful in ways that don't require my bank account." For the first time in 10 days, she smiled at him without reservation. "You don't know how to cook. YouTube University is free, and I'm a quick learner." Day 15 marked the halfway point, and Richard was discovering muscles he'd forgotten he had. Carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs was harder than any gym workout, and cooking for 3 people required planning skills that made corporate mergers look simple. But he was also discovering satisfaction that money had never bought. When Marcus's math grades improved, Richard felt prouder than he had about any business deal. When Denise came home exhausted and found dinner waiting, her gratitude meant more than any profit margin. "How are you holding up?" Denise asked as they sat on her small balcony, sharing a beer and watching the neighborhood wind down for the night. "I'm tired," he admitted. "Everything takes longer when you can't just pay someone to do it for you. But I'm also—" "What?" "Happy. Genuinely happy in a way I haven't been in years. Maybe ever. Because you're helping. Because I'm needed. Not my money, not my connections, not my name on a building. Just me." Denise reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "You know this is the real test, Dawn." "What do you mean?" "Day-to-day life. Showing up when it's boring or hard or thankless. Anyone can be charming for a dinner date or romantic for a weekend getaway. But washing dishes and helping with homework and taking the bus in the rain, that's where you find out who someone really is." "And who am I?" She studied his face in the fading light, taking in the changes 2 weeks had brought. He looked younger somehow, less polished but more genuine. The entitled edge had softened into something that resembled actual humility. "You're becoming someone I could fall in love with." The words hung between them like a promise neither was quite ready to make, but both were beginning to believe in. Good, Richard asked. Ask me again in 15 days. Day 20 brought unexpected complications when Victoria appeared at the hospital where Denise was working overtime shifts. We need to talk, Victoria announced, cornering Denise in the break room. I have nothing to say to you. But I have things to say to you. About Richard. About patterns you obviously don't know about. Denise poured coffee with steady hands. I'm listening. This performance he's putting on? The bus rides, and the cooking, and the playing house with your family? It's exactly what he did with Maria Santos. Down to helping with her little brother's homework. The coffee cup trembled slightly in Denise's hands. You're lying. Am I? Ask him about the tutoring. Ask him about the cooking lessons. Ask him how many times he's ridden public transportation to prove he's just a regular guy. Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. He has a playbook, sweetheart, and you're following it exactly like the others did. As Victoria walked away, her parting shot echoed in the sterile air. The only difference between you and them is that you're lasting longer. But midnight always comes, Cinderella, and when it does, the carriage turns back into a pumpkin. Denise stood alone in the break room, Victoria's words poisoning everything she'd started to believe about the man who'd been showing up every day for 20 days straight. Was she just another chapter in a story he'd written before? Or was Victoria trying to sabotage something real out of jealousy and spite? Comment below. Do you believe Victoria or trust what you've seen for yourself? How do you know when someone's change is real versus performance? Hit that subscribe button because day 21 is going to test everything they've built, and the truth about Richard's past is about to collide with the future he's fighting to create. When the attacks came from outside, they discovered that the strongest foundation isn't built on passion. It's built on people who have your back. Day 21 arrived with lawyers and threats. Victoria hadn't disappeared quietly into her world of yachts and designer wounds. She'd been planning, scheming, gathering ammunition for a war that would make their previous confrontations look like playground disputes. Richard stood in his attorney's office, documents scattered across mahogany like battle plans. She's claiming fraud. Says I manipulated company resources for personal relationships. Is there merit to her claims? His lawyer asked. Technically, the foundation uses corporate funds. The cards were company accounts. If she wants to twist it, she can make your life complicated. Across town, Denise was dealing with her own invasion. Reporters camped outside her apartment building, neighbors whispering behind curtains, her nephew scared to walk to school alone. Auntie D, Marcus said, clutching his inhaler. Why are those people taking pictures of our building? Because some folks don't understand that love comes in different packages, baby. Are you in trouble? Not the kind that matters. But trouble was exactly what Victoria had in mind. She'd hired investigators, dug through records, found every angle she could exploit. The story she painted was simple. Rich man manipulates poor employee for physical satisfaction, throws money around to justify the arrangement. The community center in East Atlanta hadn't seen a billionaire with paint-stained hands before, but Richard showed up every Saturday, building trust one repaired wall at a time. Today, though, the usual volunteers were joined by news crews and protesters Victoria had hired to create chaos. Mr. Cole, a reporter shoved a microphone in his face. Is it true you've used company funds to buy silence from multiple female employees? Richard kept painting, brush steady despite the circus around him. I'm here to help fix a roof that leaks when it rains. Everything else is noise. But what about the allegations? The allegations come from someone who spent $7 million on toys, while my girlfriend spent the same amount saving lives. You tell me who has credibility. Mrs. Washington, Denise's mother, appeared beside him with her own paintbrush. Cancer treatment had made her thin, but her voice carried strength that silenced the crowd. This man paid for my treatment when he didn't know me from Eve, she announced. This man showed up at my daughter's apartment at midnight in the rain to apologize for hurting her feelings. This man learned to cook tamales because my grandson likes them better than fancy restaurant food. Y'all want a story? There's your story. Other voices joined hers. families whose medical bills had disappeared, students whose scholarships had opened doors, children whose playgrounds had been rebuilt by hands that had never held hammers before Richard started showing up. Victoria arrived with her legal team just as the community rally was reaching full voice. She stepped out of a car that cost more than most of these people's houses, designer armor gleaming under television lights. "This is all very touching," she announced through a megaphone she brought for maximum drama. But sentiment doesn't change facts. Richard Cole has a pattern of exploiting vulnerable women, and I have documentation to prove it. "What kind of documentation?" Mrs. Washington called out. "Employment records, financial transfers, a history of relationships with staff members that ended in monetary settlements." The crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling through faces that had been certain just moments before. Richard set down his paintbrush and walked toward Victoria. For a moment, the old dynamic reasserted itself. Wealthy man in expensive suit approaching woman who belonged to his world. But then Denise appeared beside him, work clothes paint splattered, hands dirty from actual labor. She took his hand without hesitation, and suddenly the image shifted. This wasn't about money or power or manipulation. This was about two people who'd found something real in a world full of artificial connections. "You want to know about patterns?" Denise's voice carried clearly across the crowd. "Here's a pattern. Richard shows up. Every day, on time, ready to work. He doesn't send assistants or write checks or delegate responsibility. He shows up. That's not what I'm talking about. Here's another pattern. He listens. When I told him about my mother's treatment, he didn't immediately reach for his wallet. He asked what I needed, how he could help in ways that didn't involve money. You're naive if you think." "Here's the pattern that matters most," Denise continued, her voice growing stronger. "He changed, not because he had to, not because someone forced him, but because he wanted to become someone worthy of love instead of just someone who could buy attention." Victoria's megaphone seemed smaller now, her designer armor less impressive against the backdrop of real community support. "These people don't know what they're talking about," Victoria protested. "They're being manipulated." "We know what we've seen," Mrs. Washington interrupted. "We know who showed up when we needed help. We know who stayed when things got difficult. And we know the difference between someone who loves with their wallet and someone who loves with their whole heart." The crowd noise grew, not angry but determined. Signs appeared from nowhere. "Love builds bridges. Character counts. Actions speak louder." Richard squeezed Denise's hand, feeling something he'd never experienced in 42 years of life. Unconditional support from people who owed him nothing but gave him everything. "Victoria," he said quietly, his voice somehow carrying over the crowd noise. "You could try to destroy what we've built. You can hire lawyers and investigators and reporters. But you can't manufacture the kind of love that shows up when cameras aren't rolling. Love." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "This is about money, Richard. It's always about money. For you, maybe. But some of us have learned that the richest people aren't those who have the most. They're those who need the least to be happy." The courthouse steps overflowed with faces from the neighborhood. Teachers and single mothers and kids whose hospital bills have been paid, all wearing matching t-shirts that read "Love Builds Bridges." Victoria looked around at the sea of support, at the community that had rallied not for money but for principle. And for the first time since this began, her confidence wavered. "This isn't over," she said, but the words lacked their earlier venom. "Yes, it is," Denise replied simply. "Because you're fighting alone, and we're not." As the crowd began to disperse, people stopping to shake hands and offer support, Richard pulled Denise aside. They stood in the shadow of the community center they'd been repairing, paint still drying on walls that would shelter kids whose families had learned what real wealth looked like. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For believing in who I could become instead of just seeing who I used to be." Denise smiled, the first truly relaxed expression she'd worn in weeks. "Ask me again tomorrow." "What?" "Ask me again if I believe in you. And the day after that. And every day for the rest of our lives. Because that's what love looks like, not a one-time decision, but a daily choice to see the best in someone even when they're not perfect." Richard kissed her then, in front of news cameras and community members and anyone else who wanted to witness what real victory looked like. Not the kind won in courtrooms or boardrooms, but the kind built one day at a time by people who refused to let others define their worth. The legal battles would continue, but they'd already won the only fight that mattered. They'd proven that love backed by community was stronger than money backed by spite. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they'd go home together, paint in their hair and purpose in their hearts, knowing that the best foundations aren't built with money. They're built with people who choose to stand together when the world tries to tear them apart. Share your support stories below. When has your community rallied around your relationship? What does it mean to have people fight for your love? Hit that subscribe button because the judge's ruling is coming next, and Victoria's final desperate move will shock you. They'd won the right to love each other, but now came the harder question. How do you build a life that honors both your different worlds? The judge's gavel fell with the sound of finality, echoing through a courtroom packed with supporters who traveled from both Dallas and Atlanta to witness justice. Victoria's fraud claims had crumbled under the weight of evidence and community testimony, but more importantly, they'd crumbled under the truth. Case dismissed, Judge Martinez announced. And might I add that this court has rarely seen such a display of genuine community support for two people whose only crime appears to be loving each other across social boundaries. Richard felt Denise's hand squeeze his as the courtroom erupted in cheers. They'd won, but victory felt different than he'd expected. Less like conquest, more like permission to build something new. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with questions that felt smaller now, less threatening. Mr. Cole, what's next for you and Denise? Richard looked at the woman beside him, still in her best dress, but with paint under her fingernails from the community center work they'd finished that morning before court. Next, we figure out how to merge two different worlds into one life that makes sense for both of us. What does that look like practically? Denise stepped forward. It looks like compromise. It looks like him learning to live in a neighborhood where people know your business, and me learning to navigate charity galas where people pretend they don't. 3 months later, they stood at another groundbreaking ceremony, but this one was different. The site sat exactly between Dallas's gleaming downtown and the neighborhoods where real people lived real lives. The building rising from red Georgia clay would house their foundation's new headquarters, but it would also house something more important, a bridge between worlds that had spent too long pretending they had nothing in common. The guest list told the story of what they'd built. Dallas society mixed with Atlanta families, business suits standing beside work uniforms, children from both communities playing together while their parents learned they had more in common than money could measure. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard addressed the crowd, Denise beside him holding the golden shovel. This building represents something we've learned over the past year. The strongest foundations aren't built on similarity, they're built on shared values. Mrs. Washington stood in the front row, her cancer in remission, holding the grandson who'd inspired so much of this journey. She nodded as Richard continued. We're not trying to erase differences or pretend that background doesn't matter. We're trying to prove that character matters more. That kindness translates across any language. That love built on respect can bridge any gap. Denise took the microphone, her voice carrying confidence that hadn't been there a year ago. When I first walked into Richard's world, I felt like an alien visiting a planet where everything was beautiful, but nothing was real. When he first walked into my world, he looked like he might break if someone asked him to take the bus. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But somewhere in between those two extremes, we found a third option, building something new together. Not his world or my world, but our world. The shovel hit Earth as cameras flashed, but the real moment happened afterward when kids from both communities ran toward the construction site, already planning games they'd play in spaces that hadn't been built yet. That evening, in a small apartment they'd kept as a retreat from the larger house they'd bought together, Richard and Denise sat on the fire escape, watching their neighborhood settle into evening rhythms. No regrets? Denise asked, her head on his shoulder. About which part? Falling in love with my employee, surviving a public legal battle, or learning to cook for someone who actually appreciates food instead of just photographing it? Any of it. All of it. Richard was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. A year ago, he'd owned more than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, but felt empty most days. Now he owned less, but felt fuller than he'd imagined possible. The only regret I have is waiting so long to realize what I was missing. What were you missing? Purpose. Connection to something bigger than my own comfort. The satisfaction that comes from building something that helps other people instead of just accumulating things that help no one. Denise tilted her head to look at him. You know that satisfaction doesn't require dating your maid, right? You could have Discover Community Service without the complicated relationship part. Could I? Because it seems like you were the key that unlocked everything else. You were the person who showed me that giving back felt better than taking more. Or maybe you were ready to learn, and I just happened to be the teacher who was available. Maybe, but I prefer my version of the story. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Marcus play basketball with neighbors in the court below. The kid's asthma was under control, his grades were improving, and he'd started talking about college like it was actually possible. He asked me something today, Denise said. What? If you're going to be his uncle for real, or just for now. Richard felt his chest tighten. They'd been living together for 6 months, building something that felt permanent but had never been officially defined. What did you tell him? I told him that depended on whether you were planning to stick around for the boring parts or just the interesting ones. The boring parts? Grocery shopping, helping with homework, sitting in hospital waiting rooms when people you care about get sick, arguing about money and whose turn it is to do dishes and whether we can afford to help another family when our own budget is tight. Richard turned to face her fully. Denise, I've spent 42 years thinking that the interesting parts were charity galas and business deals and exotic vacations. The boring parts you're describing? They're the most interesting things I've ever experienced. Even when I get cranky because I'm tired from working double shifts. Especially then, because you get cranky about things that matter instead of things that don't. Even when Marcus leaves his homework until the last minute, and we both have to help him finish it at midnight. Especially then, because I finally get to be part of something that builds the future instead of just accumulating present comfort. Denise studied his face in the fading light. You know this isn't a fairy tale, right? I'm not going to transform into someone who fits seamlessly into your old life, and you're not going to transform into someone who forgets where you came from. Good. I don't want either of us to transform into something we're not. I want us to evolve into something we choose to be. Which is what? Two people who decided that building a life together was more important than protecting the lives we had separately. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's basketball bounced up onto the fire escape, followed by his head appearing over the railing. Y'all being all romantic up here while I'm down here losing at basketball by myself? You're not losing, Richard called down. You're practicing. Same thing. Marcus climbed onto the fire escape, squeezing between them on the narrow platform. So, are you going to ask her or what? Ask me what? Denise looked between them suspiciously. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Not the kind of box that contained rings worth more than houses, but the kind that contained promises worth more than money. Marcus helped me pick it out, Richard said, opening the box to reveal a simple silver band with a small stone that caught the streetlight like captured hope. He said you don't like flashy things, but you appreciate things that last. Denise stared at the ring, then at Marcus, then at Richard. Are you proposing to me on a fire escape with my nephew as a witness? If that's where you want to be proposed to, then yes. If you'd rather have champagne and violins and a photographer, we can do that too. If you'd rather not be proposed to at all, we can pretend this is just a conversation about commitment that happens to involve jewelry. What I'd rather have, Denise said slowly, is honesty about what we're signing up for, which is a life where your friends might always see me as the maid who got lucky, and my friends might always see you as the rich guy who's slumming it. A life where we have to navigate two different worlds without losing ourselves in either one. A life where our kids might get questions about why mommy and daddy look different and come from different places. Our kids, if we're doing this, We're doing it all the way. No half measures. Richard took the ring from the box, holding it up to catch the last rays of sunlight filtering through the urban landscape they'd learned to call home together. Denise Washington, will you marry me and help me build a life that's bigger than either of us could create alone? Will you promise to keep taking the bus even after you don't have to prove anything to me anymore? I promise. Will you promise to let me keep working even when we don't need the money? Because I need the purpose? I promise. Will you promise to teach our kids that wealth isn't about how much you have, but about how much you're willing to share? I promise all of that and more. Denise held out her left hand. Then yes, Richard Cole, I'll marry you and help you build something worth building. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Marcus cheered loudly enough to attract attention from neighbors who leaned out windows to see what the celebration was about. So, does this mean you're really going to be my uncle now? Marcus asked. It means I'm going to be your family, Richard replied. Whatever that looks like, however long it takes, however complicated it gets. The celebration that erupted in the courtyard below was spontaneous and real. Neighbors they'd grown to know and love sharing their joy, kids running between adults, someone bringing out a radio for impromptu dancing. This was what fairy tales look like in real life, Richard realized. Not castles and carriages, but fire escapes and basketball courts and communities that celebrated love in all its complicated, beautiful forms. They'd built something worth defending, and now they were ready to build something worth sharing with the next generation. Share your thoughts. How do you merge different worlds in a relationship? What compromises are worth making for love? Hit that subscribe button because what happens next will test everything they've built. Denise has news that changes everything. The news that should have brought pure joy instead brought a question that could unravel everything. Were they ready to bring a child into a love story the world still questioned? The pregnancy test showed 2 lines, but Denise stared at it with fear instead of joy. After everything they'd built, would a baby complicate their careful balance or complete their impossible dream? She sat on the bathroom floor of their shared house. Not Richard's penthouse, not her old apartment, but the place they'd chosen together in a neighborhood that was becoming theirs. The test trembled in her hands as reality shifted around her, like furniture being rearranged in the dark. 6 months married, 18 months since that first black heart test, and now this. A baby, their baby, a child who would carry both their stories in features that might favor her, might favor him, might be something entirely new. Denise, Richard's voice came through the door. You okay in there? She wasn't okay. She was terrified and thrilled and overwhelmed by the magnitude of bringing new life into a relationship that still felt like it was under construction. I'm fine, she called back, which was the kind of lie married people told when they needed a few more minutes to process before sharing. But this was Richard, who'd learned to read her silences as well as her words. His footsteps retreated, giving her space while staying close enough to help if she needed him. That was the thing about him that still surprised her. He'd learned to love without overwhelming, to support without controlling. The transformation from employer to partner had been so complete that sometimes she forgot how different things used to be. She opened the bathroom door to find him sitting on their bed, still in his work clothes from the foundation. His hands were stained with paint from the children's art program he'd been helping with, and his hair was mussed from the way he ran his fingers through it when he was thinking. We need to talk, she said. That sounds ominous. It might be, or it might be wonderful. I haven't decided yet. She sat beside him on the bed they'd picked out together. Not too expensive, not too cheap, just right for 2 people who were still learning how to share space and dreams. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that could either connect their future or collapse under the weight of complications they hadn't considered. Richard's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, joy, concern, protectiveness, and finally a smile that started small and grew until it threatened to split his face in half. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. He reached for her hands, pulling her closer until their foreheads touched. How do you feel about that? Scared, happy, worried, excited, all at the same time. What are you worried about? Denise took a breath, organizing thoughts that had been swirling like leaves in a storm since she'd seen those two lines. I'm worried about raising a mixed-race child in a world that still argues about whether our love is real. I'm worried about photographers following our kid to school. I'm worried about your friends looking at our baby and seeing the maid's child instead of your child. I'm worried about my family putting too much pressure on this baby to be perfect so they can prove we belong in your world. Richard listened without interrupting, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. I'm worried, she continued, that we've been so focused on proving our relationship works that we haven't thought about whether we're ready to bring someone else into the experiment. You think our marriage is an experiment, don't you? We're two people from completely different backgrounds trying to build something that doesn't have a manual. We're making it up as we go along, hoping that love is enough to bridge every gap. And you don't think it is? Denise was quiet for a moment, considering. I think love is necessary, but I don't know if it's sufficient. Love doesn't protect kids from cruel comments on playgrounds. Love doesn't make college applications easier when admissions counselors can't figure out how to categorize your family. Love doesn't answer questions about identity when your child looks like one parent but grew up in the other parent's world. Richard stood up and walked to the window that overlooked their neighborhood. Kids were playing in the street, their voices carrying through evening air. Some were black, some were white, some were brown, all of them just being children without thinking about categories or complications. Do you remember what you told me about patterns? He asked. Which thing? You said patterns don't lie, that I had a history of relationships with employees, and patterns reveal character. Denise felt her stomach tighten. Richard, no, let me finish. You were right about patterns, but I think there's something else true about patterns. They can be broken. New patterns can be created. Better patterns can be established. He turned back to face her. My father's pattern was to use money to control people. My pattern was to use money to avoid genuine connection. But this baby gets to start fresh. This baby gets to establish new patterns. What if the world won't let our baby start fresh? Then we teach our child that the world's limitations don't have to become personal limitations. We teach our child that identity isn't something imposed from outside. It's something built from inside. Denise felt tears starting, the pregnancy hormones making everything feel more intense. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, but it's possible. Look at what we've already built. Look at the community that stood with us during the legal battle. Look at Marcus, who sees us as family without questioning whether we fit conventional categories. He sat back down beside her, taking her hands again. Denise, I can't promise our child won't face challenges because of who we are, but I can promise that our child will face those challenges backed by two parents who chose each other consciously, supported by a community that believes in love over convention, armed with the knowledge that they were wanted and planned for and celebrated from the moment we knew they existed. Even though we're still figuring things out ourselves, especially because we're still figuring things out. That's what good parents do. They grow alongside their children instead of pretending they have everything solved. The nursery took shape in soft yellows and greens, but outside the windows, camera crews waited like predators, ready to document every moment of their expanding family. The media attention had intensified once news of the pregnancy leaked. Headlines ranged from sweet to salacious. Love Story Continues competed with MAID's Baby Worth Millions for reader attention. We could move somewhere more private, Richard suggested one morning after chasing away a photographer who'd been trying to capture shots of Denise leaving for her prenatal appointment. Running away won't solve anything. Besides, this is our home. We picked this neighborhood because it represents what we want to build together. But is it fair to subject our child to this level of scrutiny? Is it fair to teach our child that love should hide from public opinion? They were learning to navigate pregnancy together. Richard reading parenting books while Denise dealt with morning sickness, both of them attending doctor's appointments that felt surreal after years of being told they came from different worlds. Have you thought about names? Dr. Martinez asked during their 12-week appointment. They looked at each other and laughed. We're still working on that, Denise admitted. How do you choose a name that honors both backgrounds without making a political statement? You choose a name you love, the doctor said simply. The rest works itself out. That evening, they sat in the nursery they were slowly putting together, surrounded by gifts from both communities. Hand-knitted blankets from Richard's former colleagues, mixed with practical items from Denise's family and neighbors. I have a confession, Richard said. What? I've been keeping a list of names in my phone. Show me. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a note titled Future Cole. The list was longer than she'd expected, with names from both their cultures, names that meant strength, names that meant hope, names that meant new beginnings. You really want this, Denise said, studying the list. I really want this. Not because I think a baby will solve anything or prove anything, but because I can't imagine creating life with anyone else. Because I want to see what love looks like when it has your eyes and my stubbornness, or my eyes and your strength. What if the baby looks like me and people assume things about why you're with me? What if the baby looks like me and people assume things about why you're with me? What if the baby looks like both of us and people don't know what to assume? Then maybe our child will help the world learn that some things are too beautiful to fit into simple categories. As the pregnancy progressed, they discovered that preparing for parenthood was like preparing for marriage had been. An opportunity to examine every assumption and build something intentional rather than accidental. They took parenting classes where they were often the only mixed-race couple, attended cultural festivals to expose their unborn child to the richness of both heritages, and had difficult conversations about discipline, education, and how to raise a child who would be comfortable in both Dallas boardrooms and Atlanta neighborhoods. Are you scared? Denise asked one night as they felt the baby kicking. Terrified, Richard admitted, but also excited. I keep thinking about all the things I want to teach this little person, all the places I want to show them, all the people I want them to meet. Like who? Like your mother, who taught me what real strength looks like. Like Marcus, who's going to be the best cousin in history. Like Mrs. Rodriguez from the Foundation, who speaks 3 languages and makes the best empanadas in Dallas. You want our child to know Mrs. Rodriguez's empanadas? I want our child to know that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up when you need them. And Mrs. Rodriguez has been showing up for other people's kids for 30 years. That was the moment Denise realized they were going to be okay. Not perfect, not without challenges, but okay. Because they were building their family the same way they'd built their relationship, with intention, with community support, and with the understanding that love was something you did, not just something you felt. The baby would arrive in 3 months, and they still had questions without answers. But they also had something more valuable, the commitment to figure it out together, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of love at a time. Comment below. What fears would you have bringing children into a relationship that faces public scrutiny? How do you prepare for challenges you can't fully anticipate? Hit that subscribe button, because the next chapter brings unexpected family drama that tests everything they think they know about acceptance and belonging. Forgiveness is hard enough when you're healthy, but when death is watching from the corner, some conversations can't wait for perfect timing. The call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Richard's phone buzzed against the nightstand while Denise slept beside him, 7 months pregnant and finally comfortable enough to rest deeply. This is Richard. Mr. Cole, this is Presbyterian Hospital. Your father has been admitted. He's asking for you. Richard sat up in bed, trying to process words that didn't make sense. His father hadn't spoken to him in 18 months. Not since the newspaper articles about his relationship with Denise had reached Highland Park Society pages. What's wrong with him? Heart attack. He's stable, but he's asking for both of you. You and your wife. Both of them. Richard looked at Denise, who was stirring beside him, pregnancy making her sensitive to every sound and movement. We'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to Presbyterian felt longer than the 18 months of silence that had preceded it. Denise sat in the passenger seat, one hand on her belly, the other holding Richard's free hand. You don't have to do this, she said. He made his choice when he decided our love wasn't acceptable. Maybe. Or maybe he made his choice when he was healthy and proud and surrounded by people who reinforce his prejudices. This might be different. Deathbed conversions are still conversions of convenience. Does that make them less real? Highland Park Presbyterian was the kind of hospital where Richard's father belonged. Private rooms, marble floors, staff who addressed patients by their full names and titles. It was a world away from the community hospital where Denise had worked, where she'd learned that healing was more about human connection than expensive equipment. They found Richard Cole Sr. in the cardiac ICU, looking smaller than Richard remembered. 78 years old, wearing a hospital gown that made him seem vulnerable instead of imposing. He opened his eyes when they entered, focusing first on Richard, then on Denise. His gaze lingered on her pregnant belly, something shifting in his expression that might have been regret or might have been calculation. You came. You called. The conversation felt stilted, formal, like a business meeting between strangers who happen to share DNA. I need to say some things, Richard's father continued, before it's too late. Dad, let me talk. The older man's voice carried echoes of the authority that had once run a corporation, but it was tempered by the humility that comes with mortality pressing close. I was wrong. About her. About both of you. About what matters. He looked directly at Denise. I am sorry. For the things I said, for the things I didn't say, for treating you like you weren't good enough for my son, when the truth is my son wasn't good enough for you. Denise was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Cole. Richard. Please. We're family now, aren't we? Are we? Because 18 months ago, you made it clear that your family didn't include people like me. The older man closed his eyes, pain creasing features that genetics had passed to his son. 18 months ago, I was a fool who thought bloodlines mattered more than character. I was surrounded by people who told me what I wanted to hear instead of what I needed to know. What changed? Richard asked. I got sick. Started spending time in hospitals, around doctors and nurses who didn't care about my last name or my bank account. Started seeing how people treat each other when status doesn't matter. Started realizing that the woman my son married was exactly the kind of person I should have been proud to welcome into our family. He reached toward Denise with a trembling hand. I heard about the foundation work, about the community programs, about how you used that money Richard gave you. I heard about the families whose lives you changed, the children whose futures you secured. You were keeping track? I was trying to find reasons to justify my prejudice, but I kept finding evidence that I'd been wrong about everything that mattered. The hospital room in Highland Park smelled like disinfectant and regret, but when Richard's father reached for Denise's hand, something shifted in the stale air, the sound of walls crumbling after decades. Will you forgive a stubborn old man who confused tradition with wisdom? Denise looked at Richard, then back at his father. I'll forgive you if you can forgive yourself for missing 18 months of your son's life because you couldn't see past my background. I don't know if I can do that. Then we'll work on it together, because that baby I'm carrying is going to need grandparents who model forgiveness instead of pride. Over the following days, as Richard Sr. recovered, 3 generations began learning how to be family. It wasn't easy. Decades of patterns don't dissolve overnight, but it was possible. Tell me about the nursery, the older man said during one visit. We painted it green and yellow, Richard replied. Gender neutral, but also just colors that feel peaceful. I remember painting a nursery. Your mother wanted blue, but you kept me up all night with your kicking, so I ended up painting it at 3 a.m. just to have something to do. You painted my nursery? Twice. The first time came out streaky because I was too impatient to let the primer dry. Your mother made me start over. His smile held memories that softened the edges of years of distance. She said, if you're going to do it, we should do it right. I never knew that. There's a lot you don't know about those early years. A lot I should have shared instead of just focusing on building the business. Denise shifted in her chair, the baby moving restlessly inside her. What would you want us to know? About raising children, about family? Richard Sr. was quiet for a long moment, machines beeping softly around them. I want you to know that children don't care about your mistakes as much as they care about your presence. I spent your whole childhood trying to build something to leave you instead of just being there with you. You were providing for us. I was hiding from the hard parts. Board meetings were easier than bedtime stories. Business trips were easier than homework help. I convinced myself that financial security was the same thing as emotional security. He looked at Denise's belly again. That baby is going to need more than a trust fund. They're going to need parents who show up for the boring parts and the difficult parts, not just the celebration parts. We're learning that, Denise said. Richard takes the bus to work now. I still work at the community center, even though we don't need the money. We're trying to stay connected to real life instead of just rich life. Good. Don't let success isolate you from the people who made you who you are. The Will reading 3 weeks later revealed a surprise that left everyone speechless. Richard's father had left everything to their unborn child, with one condition that could destroy or save their relationship forever. The lawyer's office felt smaller with so many people crowded into spaces designed for private family business. Richard and Denise sat together, her 8 months pregnant now and uncomfortable in any position. Marcus was there because he'd become family in ways that transcended law, and Mrs. Washington because she'd earned the right to witness this moment through months of bedside visits and forgiveness extended when it hadn't been deserved. The estate is substantial, the lawyer began, shuffling papers that represented decades of accumulated wealth. Properties, investments, business holdings. The total value exceeds $40 million. Richard felt Denise's hand tighten in his. They talked about inheritance, about the complications of generational wealth, about whether they wanted their child to grow up with that kind of financial security or burden. However, the lawyer continued, there are conditions attached to the inheritance. What kind of conditions? Richard asked. The child must be raised in Dallas. The child must attend specific schools that Mr. Cole Sr. has pre-selected. The child must spend summers with the extended family in Highland Park. And, he paused, looking uncomfortable. The child must carry the Cole family name prominently, not hyphenated or secondary. The room went silent except for the sound of Denise's sharp intake of breath. He's trying to control our child from the grave, she said quietly. There's more, the lawyer continued. If these conditions aren't met, the inheritance reverts to charity. But there's also a clause that if the conditions are rejected entirely, Mr. Cole Jr. inherits everything with no restrictions. Richard stared at the documents, understanding dawning. His father's final test wasn't about money. It was about choice. Accept the conditions and secure their child's financial future while potentially compromising their values, or reject the conditions and maintain their autonomy while giving up generational wealth. How long do we have to decide? Denise asked. 30 days after the child is born. That night, they sat in the nursery that was finally complete, surrounded by gifts from both communities and facing a decision that could define their family's future. What do you think? Richard asked. I think your father was cleverer than I gave him credit for. He's forcing us to decide what we really value, financial security or personal freedom. Which would you choose? I don't know. That money could fund scholarships for hundreds of kids like Marcus. It could expand the foundation beyond anything we've imagined. It could guarantee our child never worries about college or healthcare or any of the things that kept me awake at night growing up. But it also means raising our child according to someone else's plan. It means Dallas private schools instead of neighborhood schools. It means Highland Park summers instead of Atlanta family time. It means prioritizing Cole family tradition over Washington family culture. Richard moved his hand to her belly, feeling their daughter. They'd finally learned she was a girl, responding to his touch with kicks that suggested she had opinions about everything already. What if we found a third option? Like what? What if we accept the inheritance, but use it in ways that honor both legacies? What if we prove that wealth can be a tool for connection instead of isolation? Ow! The Dallas school requirement. What if we choose a school that's diverse and community-focused instead of exclusive and elite? The Highland Park summers. What if we use them to bridge communities, bringing Atlanta family to Dallas and Dallas experiences to Atlanta kids? Denise considered this. And the name requirement? What if Cole becomes our daughter's middle name, and she gets to choose what that means to her as she grows up? You think we can outsmart a dead man's legal requirements? I think we can honor the spirit of family connection while rejecting the spirit of family control. They spent the remaining weeks of pregnancy researching schools, visiting programs, talking to other mixed families about navigating cultural expectations and financial opportunities. The decision crystallized one afternoon when they visited a Dallas elementary school that served both Highland Park and East Dallas, where kids from mansion neighborhoods learned alongside kids from apartment complexes, where the PTA meetings were conducted in 3 languages and the playground looked like a United Nations assembly. This is what integration actually looks like, the principal told them as they watched children of every background playing together. Not just tolerance, but genuine community building. Does it work? Denise asked. Look around. These kids don't see differences as barriers. They see differences as interesting. They're growing up thinking diversity is normal, that friendship crosses every line adults draw. That evening, Richard called the lawyer. We'll accept the inheritance with modifications. Our daughter will attend Dallas schools, but we choose which ones based on educational quality and community values, not social status. She'll spend summers with extended family, but that includes both sides of her heritage. She'll carry the Cole name, but as part of her identity, not instead of it. Mr. Cole, I don't think the will allows for modifications. Then we reject the inheritance and use our own resources to build what we want to build. There was silence on the other end of the line. Let me review the documents more carefully. There might be some flexibility in interpretation. The next morning brought a call that changed everything. Mr. Cole, I found something. Your father included a private letter to be opened only if you challenge the conditions. Would you like me to read it? Please. Dear Richard, if you're hearing this, it means you're thinking like a father instead of just an heir. The conditions I set weren't meant to control your daughter's life. They were meant to test whether you'd fight for your family's values or just accept someone else's vision of success. Modify anything you need to modify. The money is yours regardless. I just want to know you'd grown into someone who puts principles before convenience. Love, Dad. P.S. Tell Denise, I'm sorry it took me so long to see what a treasure she is. Richard hung up the phone and looked at Denise, who was standing in the nursery doorway with tears streaming down her face. He knew, she said. He knew we'd choose family over money, and he wanted us to know that was the right choice. So the test was really about whether we'd become the kind of parents who fight for what our child needs instead of just accepting what we're offered. I think the test was about whether we'd learned that real wealth isn't about how much you inherit. It's about how much you're willing to sacrifice for the people you love. Their daughter arrived 2 weeks later, on a spring morning that felt like the world starting fresh. She was beautiful and healthy and completely unaware that she'd inherited not just money, but the responsibility to bridge worlds that had spent too long apart. As Richard held his daughter for the first time, looking into eyes that held both his curiosity and Denise's determination, he realized that his father's final gift wasn't the $40 million. It was the understanding that some legacies are worth more than money, and some inheritances have nothing to do with what's written in legal documents. They named her Grace because that's what she represented. The unearned gift of new beginnings, second chances, and love that transcends every boundary adults try to create. Comment below. Have you ever had to choose between financial security and personal freedom? How do you honor family legacy while creating your own path? Hit subscribe because Grace's arrival brings joy, but also brings challenges no one anticipated. Inheritance can be a gift or a curse, and Richard's father had left them both, wrapped in conditions that would test whether their love was strong enough to handle generational wealth. Grace Washington Cole arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that dawned clear and bright, as if the universe wanted to provide perfect lighting for the moment everything changed. She weighed 6 pounds, 8 ounces, and from the moment she opened her eyes, it was clear she had inherited her mother's determination and her father's curiosity about the world around her. The hospital room filled with flowers from 2 different worlds. Exotic orchids from Dallas society mixed with hand-picked wildflowers from Atlanta neighbors, creating a garden that bloomed in both languages of love. She's perfect, Denise whispered, cradling their daughter against her chest while Richard sat on the edge of the hospital bed, both of them still amazed that they'd created something so beautiful together. She looks like you, Richard said, tracing the baby's tiny fingers with one of his own. She looks like herself. That's better. Mrs. Washington held her granddaughter with the careful reverence of someone who'd almost not lived to see this moment. Her cancer was in full remission now, but the memory of nearly losing her made every moment with Grace feel precious. This baby's going to change everything, she said, not as warning, but as promise. She already has, Richard replied. Marcus, now officially Grace's cousin through love, if not law, peered at the sleeping infant with the protective instincts of someone who understood what family meant beyond genetics. She's so small. How's she going to learn to play basketball? One step at a time, Denise laughed. Just like everything else we've figured out. But figuring out how to raise Grace in a world that still questioned their love proved more complex than either of them had anticipated. The inheritance money created opportunities, but also obligations. The media attention that had died down during pregnancy intensified again with Grace's birth. Baby worth millions born to former maid and billionaire husband, read one headline that made Richard want to punch something expensive. Our daughter isn't a headline, he told Denise as they sat in the nursery at home, Grace sleeping peacefully in the crib they'd assembled together. She's a person who deserves privacy and normalcy. Normal is relative when your birth announcement makes national news. Then we create our own version of normal. That became their approach to everything, creating their own version of traditional expectations. The blessing ceremony they planned brought together Baptist traditions from Denise's family and Episcopal customs from Richard's, officiated by two ministers who'd learned to work together because love required community support from all directions. We gather today not just to welcome Grace into the world, Reverend Jackson from Denise's home church announced, but to commit as a community to helping raise a child who knows she's loved by people from every background. Father Morrison from Richard's family church added, this child carries the hopes of two families, two cultures, two communities that have learned that love builds bridges stronger than anything money can construct. The ceremony was held at the foundation headquarters, in a community room that had become a symbol of what their love had built. Neighbors from East Dallas sat alongside colleagues from Highland Park. Children played together while adults shared food that represented both cultures, and Grace slept through most of it, secure in arms that passed her from person to person who'd committed to being part of her village. But creating community was easier than navigating the daily decisions that would shape Grace's identity. The inheritance conditions, while modified, still required choices that forced them to examine every assumption about raising children across cultural boundaries. The Highland Park Nursery School is excellent, Richard's mother, who'd emerged from her own grief to become an unexpectedly devoted grandmother, told them during one visit. Grace would receive an outstanding education, and she'd be around children from similar backgrounds. What do you mean by similar backgrounds? Denise asked, her voice carefully neutral. Well, affluent families. Children whose parents understand the demands of wealth and social responsibility. You mean white children from rich families. I mean children who won't make Grace feel different because of her circumstances. Denise shifted Grace to her other arm. Her circumstances include having a mother who grew up in public housing and a father who had to learn how to take public transportation at 42. Those aren't circumstances to hide from. They're part of her story. I know you didn't mean to sound exclusive, but that's how exclusivity works. It presents itself as protection when it's actually limitation. Richard watched the conversation unfold, understanding that these discussions would happen for years. Well-meaning family members and friends would offer advice based on their own experiences, not understanding that Grace's experience would be something entirely new. We want Grace to be comfortable in both worlds, he said finally. Highland Park galas and East Dallas block parties. Private school advantages and public school diversity. She should know how to navigate wealth without being defined by it. That's a lot of pressure to put on a child. That's a lot of opportunity to give child. The nursery school they eventually chose was neither Highland Park exclusive nor East Dallas neighborhood based. It was a Montessori program in North Dallas that served families from across the economic spectrum, where children learn together regardless of their parents' zip codes or bank accounts. Why this one? The director asked during their interview, clearly curious about why a billionaire couple was considering a school that charged reasonable tuition and focused on character development over social climbing. Because our daughter is going to inherit money, Richard replied, but we want her to inherit values. Money without character is just accumulation. Values without exposure to different perspectives become prejudice. And we want her to learn that her identity comes from who she chooses to be, not what she's born into, Denise added. Grace's first year passed in a blur of discoveries. She smiled at everyone equally, reaching for faces of every color with the same curiosity and delight. She seemed particularly fascinated by Marcus, who sang her songs that mixed English and Spanish, and by Mrs. Washington, who told her stories about strong women who'd overcome impossible odds. She doesn't see differences yet, Denise observed one evening as they watched Grace play with a toy that had been a gift from Richard's business partner's daughter, a black doll and a white doll that came together in a friendship set. When will she start seeing them? Probably around 3 or 4. That's when kids start noticing physical differences and asking questions about why people look different. Are you ready for those questions? Are any parents ready for questions about race and identity and belonging? But we'll figure it out like we've figured out everything else, together, with help from people who love her. The help came from unexpected places. Richard's mother volunteered to babysit so Denise could finish her nursing degree, discovering in the process that caring for Grace was more fulfilling than any charity board she'd ever served on. I missed so much with Richard, she confided to Denise one afternoon. I was so focused on maintaining appearances that I forgot to enjoy actually being a mother. You get a second chance with Grace. We all do. This baby is teaching all of us how to love without conditions, how to see possibility instead of problems. Mrs. Washington moved to Dallas to be closer to Grace, finding an apartment in their neighborhood that let her be grandmother and community elder simultaneously. She started a storytelling program at the community center, sharing tales from her childhood that gave local children a sense of history and pride. Every child needs to know where they come from, she told the kids who gathered around her twice a week. But they also need to know they get to decide where they're going. Grace celebrated her first birthday with a party that looked like the community they'd built. Kids from every background playing together, while parents who'd started as strangers became friends through the simple act of watching their children grow up together. As they watched Grace take her first wobbly steps across the community center floor, reaching for outstretched hands that belonged to people who'd committed to being part of her story, Richard and Denise realized they'd done something remarkable. They created not just a family, but a model for what America could look like when love was allowed to build bridges instead of walls. Look at her go, Marcus said as Grace abandoned, walking in favor of crawling at top speed toward a group of children who welcomed her with the easy acceptance of people too young to have learned prejudice. She's not going anywhere, Denise replied. She's going everywhere. The inheritance money had been set aside in trust funds and foundations, structured to provide security without spoiling, opportunity without obligation. Grace would grow up knowing she had resources, but also knowing that resources meant responsibility. When she's old enough to understand, Richard told the trustee who managed Grace's accounts, I want her to know that wealth is a tool, not a trophy. I want her to see money as something that can solve problems, not something that proves superiority. That's an unusual approach to inherited wealth. We're an unusual family. Grace deserves to inherit our values along with our assets. As Grace's second birthday approached, they faced new questions about education, community involvement, and how to raise a child who would be comfortable with privilege without being defined by it. She's going to face challenges we can't prepare her for, Denise said one evening as they watched Grace play with dolls of different ethnicities, creating elaborate tea parties where everyone was invited and no one was excluded. All children face challenges their parents can't prepare them for. The best we can do is give her the tools to handle whatever comes. What kind of tools? Confidence in her identity, pride in both sides of her heritage, understanding that she belongs wherever she chooses to belong. And most importantly, The knowledge that she's loved not because of what she represents, but because of who she is. Grace looked up from her tea party and grinned at them, a smile that held promises of mischief and joy and all the complications that come with growing up in a world that was still learning how to make room for love stories like theirs. They'd given her a name that meant Grace, and she was already living up to it, showing everyone around her that some gifts are too beautiful to categorize, too precious to limit, too important to anything but celebrate. Share your thoughts. How do you prepare children for a world that might not understand their family story? What values would you want to pass down regardless of financial circumstances? Hit subscribe because the next chapter reveals how Grace's presence changes not just their family, but their entire community. She'd spent her life serving others, but as she held her daughter for the first time, Denise finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. 3 years had passed since Grace's birth, and the toddler who now ran through their house with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world had transformed not just their family, but everyone who'd been part of their journey. "Mama, why does Marcus call you Annie, but I call you Mama?" Grace asked one morning, her 3-year-old logic trying to make sense of family relationships that didn't fit traditional categories. Denise paused in packing Grace's backpack for preschool, recognizing the moment she'd been preparing for since pregnancy. The question about race and identity hadn't come yet, but the questions about family structure were beginning. Because Marcus is my nephew, which means his mama is my sister. You're my daughter, which means I'm your mama. Different relationships, different names. But Marcus doesn't look like you. People and families don't always look exactly the same. What matters is that we love each other and take care of each other. Like how daddy doesn't look like me, but he's still my daddy. Exactly like that. Grace seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Denise knew more complex questions were coming. At preschool, Grace played with children from every background, but she was starting to notice that some families looked like her parents, while others had parents who matched each other more closely. How are we handling the identity conversations? Richard asked that evening as they watched Grace build elaborate block towers that she insisted represented family houses where everyone could live together. One question at a time, as honestly as possible. She's not ready for detailed discussions about race and society yet, but she's ready to understand that families come in different configurations. Are we doing this right? Is any parent doing it right? We're doing it consciously, which is probably the best we can hope for. The preschool they'd chosen continued to be a good fit. Grace thrived in the diverse environment, forming friendships based on shared interests rather than shared backgrounds. Her best friend was a little boy named Samuel whose parents had immigrated from Nigeria, and together they created elaborate games that involved multiple languages and cultural traditions. Grace taught Samuel how to make mud pies, Samuel's mother told Denise during pickup one day. And Samuel taught Grace how to count to 10 in Igbo. They're building their own little multicultural world. That's what we hope for. A childhood where diversity feels normal instead of noteworthy. It's working. Yesterday, Grace told another child that families come in all colors like crayons in a box, and you need different colors to make the best pictures. These small victories accumulated over months and years. Grace's confidence in her identity seemed to make other children more comfortable with their own differences. The preschool became a laboratory for integration, where kids learned that belonging wasn't about matching, but about mutual respect and shared joy. At home, Grace was the center of a constellation of adults who each contributed something unique to her development. Richard's mother taught her piano and proper table manners. Mrs. Washington taught her cooking and family history. Marcus taught her basketball and how to fix things that broke. Richard taught her about business and responsibility. Denise taught her about healthcare and helping people who were hurting. She's going to be the most well-rounded 4-year-old in Dallas. Richard observed one evening as they watched Grace demonstrate the piano piece she'd learned from Grandma Cole, then immediately transitioned to the card game Mrs. Washington had taught her. She's going to be herself, which is all we can ask for. The foundation work had expanded as Grace grew older. What had started as a way to channel inheritance money had become a model for community development that other cities were trying to replicate. The success wasn't just financial, It was relational. We've created something that didn't exist before, the Foundation's director told them during their annual review. A space where economic integration happens naturally, where kids from different backgrounds learn together, where families build relationships across lines that usually divide. What's the secret? A reporter asked during an interview about their work. There's no secret, Denise replied. You just have to believe that people are more alike than different and create opportunities for them to discover that for themselves. And you have to be willing to be changed by the relationships you build, Richard added. Integration doesn't mean one community absorbing another. It means both communities becoming something new together. Grace's 4th birthday party exemplified this philosophy. The guest list included children from Highland Park and East Dallas, parents who worked in corporate offices and parents who worked in community centers, grandparents who spoke different languages, but all shared the universal language of devotion to a child who belonged to everyone. This is what America could look like, Marcus observed as he watched kids of every background play together while adults who'd started as strangers discovered common ground in their love for their children. This is what America does look like in small pockets. We just have to keep expanding the pockets. The expansion came through unexpected channels. Grace's preschool experience had been so positive that other families began requesting similar programs in their neighborhoods. The foundation started funding integrated educational initiatives, community centers that served diverse populations, and scholarship programs that brought together children from different economic backgrounds. We're creating a generation that thinks diversity is normal, one program coordinator reported. Kids who grow up in these integrated environments don't develop the same prejudices as kids who grow up in segregated communities. Is it working? Look at the data. Higher academic achievement across all groups. Lower rates of conflict. Higher rates of cross-cultural friendship and partnership. Integration benefits everyone when it's done thoughtfully. Grace was 4 when she asked the question they've been preparing for since her birth. Mama, why is my skin different from Daddy's skin? They were in the backyard, Grace playing in the sandbox while Denise tended the garden they'd planted together. Richard was at work, but this conversation felt like something that needed to happen between mother and daughter first. People have different skin colors the same way they have different eye colors and hair colors. It's just part of how God made people interesting and beautiful. But some kids at school have mamas and daddies who look the same as each other. That's true. Some families have parents who look similar, and some families have parents who look different. Both kinds of families are normal and wonderful. Which kind is better? Denise set down her gardening gloves and gave Grace her full attention. Neither kind is better. They're just different. What makes families special isn't how they look, it's how they love each other. Do you love Daddy, even though he looks different? I love Daddy because he's kind and funny and he takes good care of us. His skin color doesn't matter to me, just like my skin color doesn't matter to him. Will people always think our family is weird because we look different? The question broke Denise's heart because it revealed that Grace had already sensed the scrutiny their family faced, even at 4 years old. Some people might think our family is unusual because they're not used to families that look like ours. But the people who matter, the people who really know us, think our family is wonderful because they see how much we love each other. What about the people who don't matter? We don't worry about people who judge families by how they look instead of how they love. Those people are missing out on getting to know amazing families like ours. That evening, Denise shared the conversation with Richard. How did she handle it? Better than I expected. She seemed satisfied with the explanation, but I know more questions are coming. Are you ready for them? I don't think any parent is ready for conversations about race and prejudice with their 4-year-old. But I'm grateful she feels comfortable asking us instead of trying to figure it out alone. What's our next step? We keep doing what we're doing. We keep showing her that she belongs wherever she chooses to belong. We keep surrounding her with people who celebrate her instead of questioning her. We keep building a community where love matters more than appearances. Grace's 5th birthday brought new adventures. She started asking about visiting Mama's family in Atlanta and Daddy's family in Highland Park, wanting to understand both sides of her heritage. Can we go see where you grew up, Mama? Of course. Would you like to meet your cousins, and see the house where I lived when I was little? Will they think I'm different because I live in a big house now? Another heartbreaking question that revealed how perceptive she was about economic differences. They might notice that we have different circumstances now, but they're going to love you because you're family. Love is bigger than houses or money or anything else. The trip to Atlanta became a revelation. Grace met cousins who looked like her mother, experienced the warmth of extended family, and learned about the strength that had carried her grandmother through poverty and illness to this moment of celebration. She fits right in. Denise's sister observed as they watched Grace play with cousins who accepted her immediately despite her different circumstances. Family is family. She does fit in. That's the beautiful thing about her. She belongs wherever she goes because she's confident in who she is. The visit to Highland Park was equally successful, but different. Grace met cousins who looked more like her father, experienced the privilege of generational wealth, and learned about the responsibilities that came with resources. She's charming everyone. Richard's mother reported after Grace spent an afternoon at the country club, winning over adults who'd initially been uncertain about their unconventional family structure. She's just being herself. Turns out that's enough. As Grace's fifth year progressed, the questions became more sophisticated, but her confidence remained steady. She understood that she looked like both parents in different ways, that her family story was unique, and that unique wasn't the same as wrong. "I'm lucky," she announced one day during dinner. "I get two different kinds of families, and they both love me." "How are you lucky?" Richard asked. "Some kids only get to know one kind of people. I get to know all kinds of people. That's more interesting." That evening, as they tucked Grace into bed surrounded by photos that told the story of a family built on love rather than convenience, Richard and Denise marveled at what they'd created. "She's going to be okay," Denise said. "More than okay. She's going to be confident and kind and comfortable with complexity. She's going to change the world, isn't she?" "She already has. Look around. Everyone who knows her has learned something about love crossing boundaries. That's how change happens. One person at a time, one relationship at a time, one family at a time." Grace Washington Cole was 5 years old, and she was already living proof that America's future could be brighter than its past, that love could build bridges stronger than prejudice could build walls, that some stories were too beautiful to fit into simple categories. Her bedtime prayer that night included gratitude for her mama and daddy and Marcus and both grandmas and all the cousins and friends who made her life full of love and laughter. "And thank you for making me exactly how I am," she added, "because I like being me." That, Richard and Denise agreed, was the greatest success any parent could hope for. Raising a child who liked being herself in a world that sometimes suggested she should be someone different. Share your thoughts. What does success look like in raising confident, culturally aware children? How do you teach kids to navigate difference without fear? Hit subscribe because Grace's story is just beginning, and what happens next will show you the ripple effects of love that refuses to be limited by social expectations. 5 years later, the black card test seemed like ancient history, until their daughter asked why mommy and daddy had different colored skin, and they realized their greatest test was just beginning. Grace was 8 now, no longer the toddler who'd accepted simple explanations about family differences. She was a third grader with opinions about everything, friends from every background, and questions that revealed how carefully she'd been observing the world around her. "Mama," she said one evening as Denise helped her with homework at the kitchen table that had become the center of their family life, "why do some people think it's weird that you and Daddy are married?" Denise's pencil stopped moving across the math worksheet they'd been checking together. This wasn't the first time Grace had noticed adult reactions to their family, but it was the first time she'd asked about it so directly. "What makes you think people find it weird? Yesterday at the grocery store, that lady kept looking at us. And at Marcus's game last week, some parents were whispering when you and Daddy were sitting together. And Sarah's mom asked me if you were my real mom or my stepmom." Each observation hit Denise like a small blow. They'd tried so hard to create a protected environment for Grace, but 8-year-olds noticed everything, especially 8-year-olds who'd been raised to be confident and observant. Some people aren't used to families that look like ours, Denise said carefully. They grew up in a time when most married couples looked more similar to each other. But you and Daddy love each other, right? Very much. And you both love me? More than anything in the world. Then why does it matter what other people think? It doesn't matter to us. But sometimes it matters to other people because they don't understand that love is more important than appearances. Grace was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness of someone who'd inherited both her father's analytical mind and her mother's emotional intelligence. Are they scared of us? The question was so perceptive it took Denise's breath away. Why would you think that? Because that's what Mrs. Johnson says happens when people whisper about things they don't understand. She says fear makes people act mean sometimes, even when they don't mean to be mean. Mrs. Johnson was Grace's third-grade teacher, a wise woman who'd been navigating conversations about difference and belonging for 30 years in Dallas classrooms. Mrs. Johnson is very smart. Sometimes people are uncomfortable with things that are different from what they're used to. That discomfort can make them act in ways that seem unfriendly, even when they're not trying to be hurtful. What should I do when people act like that? You should remember that their discomfort is about them, not about you. You should be proud of our family and confident in who you are. You should treat everyone with kindness, even people who don't immediately understand us, even if they're not kind to me, especially then, because that's how you show them that our family represents love, not conflict. That evening, Denise shared the conversation with Richard as they sat in their backyard, watching Grace play with the neighbor kids in the fading daylight. Their daughter's bedroom overlooked both the Dallas skyline and a playground where kids from every background played together, a view that captured everything they'd built, a world where love wasn't limited by color or class. She's noticing more, Richard said. I saw it at the school fundraiser last week. She was watching how other parents interacted with us, figuring out the social dynamics. Is that good or bad? It's inevitable. She's growing up in a world where not everyone looks like us or thinks like us. The question is whether we're preparing her to navigate that world with confidence or fear. What did Mrs. Johnson say when you talked to her about it? She said Grace is one of the most socially aware kids in her class. She notices things, but she doesn't let other people's reactions change how she feels about herself. That's the goal, right? Richard nodded, but his expression was thoughtful. I keep thinking about something my father said before he died, about how children don't care about your mistakes as much as they care about your presence. What does that have to do with Grace noticing social dynamics? I think it means that as long as we're present for these conversations, as long as we're honest with her and supportive of her questions, she'll be okay. The damage comes when kids have to figure out complicated social issues by themselves. So we keep talking. We keep talking. The conversations continued as Grace grew older, became more sophisticated, required more nuanced responses. By fourth grade, she was asking about slavery and civil rights and why some neighborhoods had better schools than others. By fifth grade, she was questioning economic inequality and wondering why some kids at school worried about having enough to eat, while others complained about too many vacation options. It's not fair, she announced one evening after learning about poverty statistics in social studies class. Why do some families have so much money they don't know what to do with it, while other families can't afford medicine when they're sick? Richard and Denise exchanged glances across the dinner table. They'd been dreading and anticipating this conversation since Grace was old enough to notice that their house was bigger than most, their cars were newer, their vacations more expensive. You're right, Denise said. It's not fair. That's why we work with the foundation, to try to make things more fair for more families. But why don't rich people just give away more money? If they have more than they need, why don't they share it? Some do, Richard replied. But sharing money effectively is more complicated than it sounds. You have to make sure you're actually helping instead of just making yourself feel better. You have to understand what people really need instead of what you think they need. Like when you gave me that card, Denise asked, referencing the story they'd shared with Grace in age-appropriate terms. You thought you were testing my character, but what you were really doing was giving me the chance to help people I cared about. Is that what we should do with our money? Give people chances to help other people. That's part of it. But it's also about creating systems that prevent problems instead of just fixing problems after they happen. Grace considered this, like the scholarship program that helps kids go to college so they can get good jobs and help their families. Exactly like that. And the free clinic, so people don't have to choose between buying medicine and buying food. Yes. So we're not just giving away money. We're investing in people. Richard felt his chest swell with pride. That's exactly what we're doing. We're investing in people because people are the best investment you can make. These dinner table conversations became a family tradition. Grace would bring home observations and questions from school. They would discuss the complexities together, and often these discussions would lead to new foundation initiatives or community programs. She's going to run this foundation someday, the current director observed during Grace's 10th birthday party, watching her move easily between groups of adults and children, engaging everyone in conversations about their work and interests. She's going to run something, Denise agreed. But she'll choose what that is based on her own passions, not our expectations. What are her passions? Justice. She has very strong opinions about fairness and equality. Art. She's incredibly creative. People. She genuinely enjoys getting to know different kinds of people and learning their stories. Sounds like a future leader to me. Grace's 10th birthday party was a snapshot of what their family had built. Kids from her school played alongside children from the foundation programs. Adults from Highland Park Society mingled with neighbors from East Dallas. Marcus, now 16 and taller than Richard, moved between groups with the easy confidence of someone who'd grown up understanding that family was defined by love, not convention. "Look at this," Mrs. Washington said, gesturing around the backyard that had been transformed into a celebration space. 10 years ago, could you have imagined this? 10 years ago, I was convinced my life was falling apart, Denise replied. Now I can't imagine it any other way. Regrets, only that it took so long to happen. Richard and I could have been building this community years earlier if we'd been brave enough to trust what we were feeling. Some things have to happen in their own time. Y'all weren't ready for each other until you were ready. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Grace found her parents cleaning up in the kitchen. "Mama, Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Always. Are you glad you fell in love with each other, even though it made some things harder?" The question was so mature, so thoughtful, that both parents stopped what they were doing to give her their full attention. "Why do you ask?" Richard said, "Because I was thinking about how some of my friends' parents got divorced, and how some of them say their parents never really loved each other. They just thought they were supposed to get married. But you two chose each other, even when it was complicated. That seems more romantic to me." Denise knelt down to Grace's eye level. "Baby, falling in love with your daddy was the best decision I ever made. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. Love that's worth having is always a little complicated. Why? Because real love requires you to grow and change and become better than you were before. Easy love doesn't challenge you to be your best self. So you became better people because you loved each other? We became the people we were supposed to be," Richard said. "Your mama taught me what real wealth looks like. It's not about what you have, it's about what you give. I taught her that she deserved to be loved, not for what she could do for someone, but for who she was as a person. And then you had me, and then we had you, and you taught us both that the best legacy isn't money in the bank. It's raising a person who will make the world better just by being in it." Grace beamed at this. "Am I making the world better?" Every single day. That night, as they tucked Grace into bed, she made an announcement that surprised them both. "I want to write a book about our family." "What kind of book?" "A true story about how love can happen between people who look different, and how that love can create more love instead of just making things complicated." "What would you call it?" Grace thought for a moment. "I'd call it Different Colors, Same Heart. Because that's what we are, right? Different on the outside, but the same where it matters most." As they left Grace's room, Richard and Denise walked hand in hand to their own bedroom, marveling at the child they'd raised who saw their love story not as an obstacle to overcome, but as an example to celebrate. "She's going to be just fine," Denise said. "More than fine. She's going to be extraordinary. She already is. Look what she's done to everyone who knows her. She's made us all more accepting, more loving, more willing to see past differences to what really matters. That's the real test, isn't it? Not whether we could love each other across differences, but whether our love could inspire other people to love more broadly. And I think we passed. They stood at their bedroom window, looking out over the neighborhood that had become their community, the city that had witnessed their journey from employer and employee to partners in building something beautiful together. 10 years after the black card test, 5 years after Grace's birth, their love story had become something larger than just two people choosing each other. It had become a demonstration that America's future could be built on bridges instead of walls, that families could be created through intention instead of just tradition, that wealth measured in relationships was more valuable than wealth measured in dollars. Grace Washington Cole was 10 years old, confident in her identity, secure in her family's love, and already showing signs that she would spend her life building bridges of her own. Her bedtime prayer that night included gratitude for parents who'd shown her that love was bigger than any category society tried to impose on it. And thank you, she added, for letting me be part of a story that proves love always wins, even when it takes a while. In the next room, her parents smiled at each other across the bed they shared, knowing that the greatest test of their love wasn't surviving public scrutiny or family disapproval or media attention. It was raising a daughter who would carry forward the best of what they'd built together while creating something entirely her own. The black card test seemed like ancient history now, but its lessons remained. Real wealth was measured in love given and received. Character mattered more than circumstances, and the most valuable inheritance any parent could leave was a child who knew they were loved not for what they represented, but for who they were. Grace was living proof that some love stories don't just change the people who live them. They change everyone lucky enough to witness them. So what would you do with unlimited resources? Feed your ego or feed your soul? Would you choose the flashy love or the lasting one? Tell me in the comments what this story taught you about real wealth. If this story made you believe in love that transcends circumstances, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about people who chose character over comfort, substance over flash. Comment below, what's your definition of true wealth? And remember, the richest people aren't those who have the most, but those who need the least to be happy. The Cole family had learned that true wealth wasn't about the size of your bank account. It was about the size of your heart and your willingness to use both your resources and your love to build bridges instead of walls. Grace would grow up knowing that her inheritance included not just money, but values, community, and the unshakable knowledge that love, when it's real and intentional and brave, can change the world one family at a time.